Art Schlichter, before professional football fully grasped how dangerous internal betting could be, Art Schlichter was already living inside that reality. The problem existed long before draft day. At Ohio State, he built a national profile, finishing high in Heisman voting while setting records and commanding attention. Evaluators focused on arm strength, leadership, and output. What remained hidden was a deep gambling habit that had already taken root, quietly expanding behind everything visible. When the Baltimore Colts selected him in the first round of the 1982 draft, expectations centered on long-term stability under center. Instead, they brought in someone already tied to bookmakers and escalating debt cycles. He placed bets on NFL games, crossing into territory the sport could not tolerate. Even worse, connections to illegal operators created direct pressure. Calls reached facilities, threats surfaced, and the issue shifted from violation to vulnerability that could compromise competitive integrity. Once the full scope surfaced, the NFL acted. Investigations confirmed policy breaches, leading to an indefinite suspension. What followed separates this case from nearly every other. He kept receiving opportunities. Reinstatement came multiple times throughout the 1980s, each one built on promises that things had changed. By the final removal, the outcome felt unavoidable. Football stepped away, but the behavior didn't. Without that platform, the cycle shifted into fraud schemes, ticket scams, and financial deception designed to fuel the same addiction. Prison sentences followed across multiple years, yet each release led back to repetition rather than recovery. He was released from prison in 2021 after serving a long sentence for fraud schemes tied to gambling. Since then, he has continued to run into legal trouble. In 2022, he was found unresponsive from a suspected overdose and later charged with drug possession. In 2024, he was arrested again for drug-related charges. In 2025, he pleaded guilty to felony drug possession and received probation with regular drug testing. Today, Art Schlichter isn't part of football at all. He's living in Ohio under probation, still dealing with the same addiction and legal problems that ended his career decades ago. Paul Hornung. Paul Hornung stood at the center of a moment that forced professional football to confront gambling directly. He was a Heisman winner, a central figure for the Green Bay Packers, and part of a championship core guided by Vince Lombardi. His reputation carried weight, which made what followed even more significant. The issue surfaced when the NFL uncovered betting activity during the 1963 season. There was no evidence he wagered against his own side or tried to influence outcomes. That distinction didn't matter. The act itself crossed a boundary the sport couldn't ignore, especially at a time when credibility was still being built. Once trust is questioned, everything surrounding competition starts to weaken. The league needed a clear response, and his case became that moment. The punishment came immediately. A full season suspension removed him from what should have been a prime year. At the same time, Alex Karras faced the same consequence, reinforcing that status offered no protection. For Green Bay, it meant losing a key offensive piece. For the broader sport, it signaled a shift toward protecting competitive fairness over individual value. He returned, resumed production, and eventually reached Hall of Fame recognition. That arc reflects a different era, one where discipline didn't permanently close the door. The approach still allowed reintegration after punishment. Hornung passed away on November 13, 2020, at the age of 84 due to complications related to dementia. He had been dealing with memory-related illness for several years before his passing. This was just after his NFL career. He died at his home in Louisville, Kentucky, but his legacy remains tied to both his Hall of Fame career and his role in one of the NFL's earliest gambling scandals. Alex Karras. While Hornung carried national attention, Alex Karras dealt with the same controversy from a completely different angle. As a defensive lineman for the Detroit Lions, his impact came through disruption rather than headlines. Physical presence and trench dominance defined his role. But once the gambling investigation expanded, his name surfaced alongside Hornung, placing him directly inside the same issue. The violation remained identical. betting on professional football games. That alone triggered the league's response. His personality added another layer. He already had a reputation for being outspoken and independent, which shaped how the suspension was perceived. Instead of just discipline, it felt like confirmation of someone operating outside expected boundaries. The NFL applied the same punishment across the board. A full season suspension in 1963 removed him during a critical stretch. For Detroit, that meant losing a defensive anchor. For Karras, it created a pause that could have derailed everything. But unlike cases that spiraled downward, his path shifted once football resumed. After reinstatement, he returned to the field and later transitioned into entertainment, building a successful second career as an actor, including roles in Blazing Saddles and the TV show Webster. That shift gives this a distinct tone compared to others. It shows someone stepping away from the sport and finding relevance elsewhere. Karras passed away on October 10, 2012, at age 77, but his life after football stands out as he remained a public figure long after his playing days ended. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Josh Gordon. When Josh Gordon first showed what he could do, it didn't look normal. His rise was not gradual or built over years. It exploded. After entering through the supplemental draft, he turned into a matchup nightmare almost immediately. In 2013, he led the entire league in receiving yards with 1,646, despite missing time, a detail that says everything about the level he reached. This went beyond potential. The dominance was already visible, forcing defenses to adjust everything just to contain one target. But what followed never resembled a stable trajectory. Far more than a single suspension or short setback, it turned into a repeating loop tied to substance policy violations. Partial seasons disappeared, then full seasons vanished entirely. Reinstatement would come, hope would build again, then another violation would reset everything. At one point, he stepped away from football altogether to enter rehab, which shows how the situation had moved beyond competition into something deeper. Each return was not about development anymore. It was about whether he could stay available long enough for any momentum to exist. That uncertainty defined every opportunity that followed. Cleveland kept giving him chances. New England Patriots took a shot. Seattle tried. Kansas City tried. Each destination carried the same idea. If stability ever held, the upside was still worth it. His move to New England stood out the most because it paired him with Tom Brady, inside a system built to maximize precision. For a moment, it looked like everything might finally align. Then the cycle returned again, cutting through whatever progress had been built. What makes this so frustrating is how long it stretched. There was no single collapse that closed everything. It dragged across years, constantly reopening just enough to restart belief. Josh Gordon is still playing football today, but not in the NFL. He last played in the NFL in 2022, but only in practice squad level. He has since moved to alternative leagues, including the XFL, playing for the Seattle Sea Dragons in 2023. In general, Gordon tries to stay in professional football, but without a stable NFL return, his career turned into a series of comebacks that never fully held. Aldon Smith. When Aldon Smith entered the league, he didn't ease into anything. He exploded. San Francisco drafted him 7th overall, and within 2 seasons, he had already placed himself in rare territory. 14 sacks as a rookie, then 19.5 the following year. That type of start usually signals the beginning of a long stretch of elite pass rushing. Production alone didn't capture it. He was pacing towards something far bigger. The shift came quickly, and it didn't originate from performance. Off-field trouble began stacking up, and it didn't stop. Legal issues, substance-related violations, and repeated discipline started pulling attention away from football. At one point, he stepped away from the 49ers entirely while dealing with those problems. Suspensions followed. Then, arrests that escalated the situation beyond something organizations could manage internally. By the time San Francisco released him, the cycle had already reached a breaking point. Even after that, chances still appeared. Oakland gave him an opportunity, showing how much belief in his ability still existed. For a brief moment, it looked like structure might return, but the same issues resurfaced, leading to extended absences and pushing him further from what should have been his prime. By 2018, discussions around his status weren't just about suspension anymore. They centered on whether he could realistically return at all after so many repeated violations. Then came one final twist. Dallas signed him in 2020 after conditional reinstatement, and he actually produced again. That part matters because it proves the ability never fully disappeared. Today, Aldon Smith is out of the NFL completely and focused on recovery. He has spoken publicly about recovery and life after the league, with his career never stabilizing after repeated legal issues. For Smith, the focus now is towards personal rebuilding rather than another comeback in the NFL. Ray Rice. At his peak, Ray Rice represented consistency and reliability in the backfield. With the Baltimore Ravens, he produced across multiple seasons, combining rushing output with receiving ability and playing a central role in a championship run. He showed no signs of fading or losing effectiveness. He was right in the middle of his prime, delivering exactly what organizations look for at that position. Everything changed in February 2014. Inside an Atlantic City elevator. An altercation with his fiancée, Janae Palmer, led to an arrest. Initially, only partial footage surfaced, showing him dragging her unconscious body. That alone created backlash, but the full impact hadn't hit yet. The NFL issued a 2-game suspension, a response that immediately drew criticism for being too light given the severity of what was already known. Then the second video surfaced. Footage from inside the elevator showed the actual strike, and the reaction changed instantly. There was no gradual change. Public response exploded, sponsors reacted, and the league moved quickly. The Ravens released him almost immediately, and the NFL escalated from a short suspension to an indefinite one. That contrast between the first response and the second showed how much undeniable visual evidence forced action that could no longer be controlled or minimized. What followed went far beyond a single name. Commissioner Roger Goodell faced heavy scrutiny, and the league completely reworked how it handled domestic violence cases. Penalties became harsher, investigations more aggressive, and tolerance dropped significantly. Ray Rice has been completely out of the NFL since 2014. His post-football life has been centered almost entirely around addressing the incident that ended his career and the broader issue of domestic violence. Rice has shifted into public speaking, working with schools, college programs, and organizations to talk directly about accountability, decision-making, and the real consequences of actions off the field, often alongside his wife as part of those discussions. He has also been involved in mentorship programs and community outreach, particularly focused on younger athletes, trying to use his story as a warning rather than attempting any kind of return to football. While he has occasionally appeared in media interviews, he has largely avoided a traditional football-related career like coaching or broadcasting, keeping his focus on advocacy work instead. As a result, his current position is not tied to the sport he once played, but to the impact of what happened, with his life defined by public accountability efforts rather than any second chapter in the NFL. Greg Hardy. Greg Hardy's rise placed him among the most disruptive edge rushers during his peak stretch with the Carolina Panthers. His 2013 campaign, where he recorded 15 sacks, positioned him as a high-value defensive force entering his prime years. Everything pointed toward long-term impact. Production, physical tools, and timing all aligned. There was no visible decline on the field that suggested anything was about to collapse. That changed in 2014 when allegations surfaced involving an assault case tied to his girlfriend. The details were graphic, and a judge initially found him guilty in a bench trial. Even before legal outcomes fully settled, the situation had already moved into public focus, creating pressure that extended beyond football. Carolina limited his involvement, eventually placing him on the exempt list while the process continued. The plot had already changed from performance to accountability. The legal outcome later changed when the conviction was dismissed on appeal after the accuser did not appear in court. From a legal standpoint, that altered the case. From a football perspective, it didn't reset public perception. The NFL conducted its own review and issued a suspension, later reduced, reinforcing that internal discipline operates separately from court rulings. Then came the most controversial decision. Dallas Cowboys signed him in 2015. That move triggered heavy backlash, especially given the timing after the Ray Rice case had already reshaped expectations. On the field, flashes of ability remained. Away from it, instability persisted. Sideline conflicts, confrontations, and behavior that suggested nothing had fundamentally changed. By the end of that season, his path forward had effectively closed. No formal lifetime ban existed with Greg Hardy, but the result mirrored one. Organizations weighed the risk against the reward and chose to distance themselves. Greg Hardy is no longer in football. He later moved into mixed martial arts, UFC, and combat sports, something that kept his name active in the sports world. But as for football, his chapter had already reached its endpoint. Ray McDonald. Ray McDonald operated as a steady contributor along a defensive front known for physical dominance while at San Francisco 49ers. He never carried the headlines, but his presence mattered within a unit that consistently pushed deep into the postseason. There was no indication from performance that anything was about to unravel. The transmission began entirely off the field. In 2014, he faced an arrest tied to domestic violence allegations. The timing placed him directly within a period when the NFL was already under heavy scrutiny following other high-profile cases. Even though prosecutors later declined to file charges due to insufficient evidence, the impact didn't disappear. The issue lingered, leaving questions that didn't resolve cleanly. What separated this case from others was what came next. Another investigation followed, this time involving a sexual assault accusation. Even without immediate convictions, the accumulation began to matter more than any single allegation. Organizations stopped viewing events individually and started seeing a pattern that suggested continued exposure to risk. That change is what changes everything in professional football decision-making. San Francisco eventually moved on, but another opportunity came when Chicago Bears brought him in. That reset didn't last. A subsequent arrest in 2015 involving domestic violence and child endangerment ended any remaining chances. Ray McDonald has been out of the NFL for years. In fact, his unofficial ban in the NFL happened in 2015, after his recent run-ins with the law. There is no clear indication as to what McDonald is doing today, but what is certain is that he left his playing days behind back in 2015. With legal trouble following him even after the NFL, he's had to deal more with the court rather than football. Isaiah Wilson. Isaiah Wilson's expectation when he joined the NFL centered on long-term reliability along the offensive line. His time at Georgia showcased size, power, and effectiveness within a run-heavy system. Prospects at that position are usually considered stable investments, projecting into multi-year contributors who anchor protection schemes. That projection didn't hold for even a full season. Instead of gradual development, his rookie year turned into a sequence of off-field issues, missed responsibilities, and growing frustration internally. Reports surfaced quickly, pointing toward disciplinary problems and lack of availability. Trust eroded almost immediately, which is extremely rare for someone selected that high. An early DUI arrest raised concerns, but it was only part of a broader picture that included additional incidents and repeated violations of organizational expectations. On-field impact never had a chance to develop. He appeared in only a handful of snaps, meaning the opportunity to establish himself barely existed. The gap between expectation and reality became clear within months. Tennessee moved on quickly, trading him to the Miami Dolphins in early 2021. That move should have provided a reset. Instead, it collapsed even faster. Within days, Miami released him after continued issues. With no serious return attempt or renewed interest from any organization in the NFL, Isaiah Wilson is out of football completely. His last shot in the NFL came back in 2021. Today, Wilson is trying to build a career in music, in particular, the rap industry scene, after one of the shortest runs for a first-round pick. He's yet to make it big in the music world through his music, but what is certain is that he has completely left behind all things NFL. Chad Wheeler. Before everything collapsed, Chad Wheeler held a quiet role along the offensive line. Undrafted out of college, he carved out opportunities through persistence, eventually landing with the Seattle Seahawks. His path followed a familiar route for linemen: depth roles, development, then chances when needed. Nothing about his trajectory suggested anything dramatic was about to happen. That changed in January 2021. Wheeler was arrested following a violent assault involving his girlfriend, a case that quickly drew national attention because of its severity. Reports described serious injuries, and details that emerged afterward painted a disturbing picture of prolonged violence. It couldn't be quietly managed or interpreted in multiple ways. The seriousness of the allegations immediately shifted everything. The Seahawks acted almost instantly. Within hours of the information becoming public, they released him. There was no waiting period, no attempt to separate football from the issue. That response reflected how much the league's approach had evolved. Earlier eras might have delayed action. By this point, hesitation had disappeared. The decision came fast and without ambiguity. Chad Wheeler is out of the NFL today and dealing with legal consequences from the case that ended his career overnight. From a legal standpoint, after no organization in the NFL considered bringing him in again, Wheeler has continued to face multiple charges tied to felony domestic violence, with proceedings that included discussions around mental health and competency. For Wheeler, one event ended everything immediately, leaving no path back into the sport. Aaron Hernandez. At one point, Aaron Hernandez looked like a foundational piece for the New England Patriots. Drafted in 2010, he quickly developed into a versatile offensive weapon, forming a dangerous tight end pairing that created constant matchup problems. His blend of size, agility, and route flexibility made him difficult to contain, and his early production reinforced that trajectory. By 2012, the organization committed to him long-term with a significant contract extension, signaling full belief in what he could become. The collapse didn't build slowly. It happened all at once. In June 2013, Hernandez was arrested in connection with the murder of Odin Lloyd, someone with personal ties to him. The investigation moved quickly, and as evidence surfaced, surveillance footage, phone records, witness accounts, the case escalated into something far beyond a standard criminal charge tied to an athlete. There was no uncertainty. It was a rapidly forming case built on multiple layers of proof. The Patriots responded immediately, releasing him within hours of the arrest. That decision removed any possibility of a return before the legal process even concluded. What followed confirmed the severity. In 2015, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Even beyond that conviction, his name remained linked to additional investigations, including a separate double homicide case where he was later acquitted. Days after that acquittal, in 2017, Hernandez was found dead in his prison cell in an apparent suicide. Post-mortem examinations revealed severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, adding another layer to a plot already far beyond football. His trajectory moved from rising star to a case tied to violence, mental health, and long-term brain damage. From a structural standpoint, this is where everything reaches its heaviest point. This isn't just a career ending, it's a complete collapse that extends far beyond the sport itself. Rae Carruth. Before everything collapsed, Rae Carruth looked like a promising long-term piece for the Carolina Panthers. A first-round pick in 1997, he entered the league with speed, routability, and the type of profile organizations invest in when building around young offensive talent. His rookie year showed enough flashes to support that projection, with more than 500 receiving yards and signs of steady growth. Nothing about his on-field path hinted at what was coming next. That changed in November 1999. Carruth became tied to a planned attack on his pregnant girlfriend, Cherika Adams. While she was driving in Charlotte, another vehicle pulled alongside hers and a passenger opened fire. Adams survived long enough to contact emergency services and identify Carruth as being involved, a detail that immediately connected him to the crime before the full case had even unfolded. What made the case especially disturbing was the planning behind it. Investigators concluded this was not random and not impulsive. It was a coordinated attack, with Carruth accused of arranging the hit and the payment behind it. Prosecutors argued the motive centered on avoiding child support obligations for the unborn baby, which pushed the case into an even darker category. After his arrest, Carruth was released on bail, fled, and was later found hiding in the trunk of a car near a motel in Tennessee, a moment that only deepened the public perception of guilt and desperation. Adams died weeks later, though doctors were able to deliver her son, who survived with severe medical complications caused by lack of oxygen during the shooting. In 2001, Carruth was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and other charges, receiving a lengthy prison sentence. The football portion ended instantly once the case surfaced, and nothing afterward could separate his name from the crime. After his release in 2018, he mostly stayed out of public view, but his legacy remains defined almost entirely by the plot, rather than anything he did on a field. Darren Sharper. For years, Darren Sharper carried the image of a highly respected defensive back. Across stops with the Green Bay Packers, Minnesota Vikings, and New Orleans Saints, he built a reputation through turnovers, instincts, and longevity. After retirement, he moved into television work, which made it seem like his transition out of football had gone smoothly and successfully. That image collapsed in 2014. What first looked like a single criminal investigation in Los Angeles quickly spread into something much larger. Authorities uncovered allegations across multiple states, including Louisiana, Arizona, and Nevada, all centered on the same pattern. Women were drugged and then sexually assaulted while incapacitated. The repeated method made clear that this was not an isolated accusation. Because the case stretched across several jurisdictions, federal authorities stepped in to help coordinate the process. That matters because it shows how widespread the conduct had become. Far beyond one city, one victim, or one night, it formed a broader criminal picture that required a combined legal response rather than a standard single-state prosecution. In 2016, Sharper pleaded guilty to multiple sexual assault charges and related offenses under a global plea arrangement. He received a federal prison sentence of more than 18 years, and that punishment permanently erased the football-centered version of his public image. The interceptions, championships, and long career stopped mattering once the scale of the crimes became clear. He remains in federal prison, with no real second chapter, no reinvention, and no meaningful public connection to football beyond the contrast between who people thought he was and what the case revealed. Lawrence Phillips. Lawrence Phillips looked like the kind of talent organizations convince themselves they can manage. At Nebraska, he was explosive, physical, and frighteningly productive. The sort of running back whose raw ability makes decision-makers talk themselves into risk. But the concern around him didn't start after the draft. It was already there, including a major domestic violence case in college that brought legal consequences and national attention before he ever reached the NFL. The St. Louis Rams still used a first-round pick on him in 1996, betting that the ability outweighed everything else. That bet failed quickly. Phillips struggled to remain aligned with expectations, and repeated behavioral issues and legal trouble kept dragging attention away from football. The Rams eventually moved on, and later stops with the Miami Dolphins and San Francisco 49ers followed the same general shape. Another opening, a short period of relative calm, then another setback. What gives this added weight is that the instability did not stop once football disappeared. Instead, it escalated. Arrests tied to assault and domestic violence continued, reinforcing that the underlying problem was never about the pressure of the NFL alone. The behavior continued long after the structure of professional sports was gone, making his case feel less like a downfall and more like a continuous line of destruction. The darkest point came while he was already in prison, when he was charged in 2015 with murdering his cellmate at Kern Valley State Prison. Before that case could fully conclude, Phillips was found dead in his cell in an apparent suicide. There was no rebuilding phase, no late reflection, and no second act. This stands out because it never offers a point where things truly stabilized. It just keeps moving from one level of damage to the next until it stops completely. Kellen Winslow II. When Kellen Winslow II entered the NFL, expectations were enormous. Drafted 6th overall in 2004 by the Cleveland Browns, he carried both the family name and the profile of a modern tight end, with size, athleticism, and receiving range. When healthy, he showed why those expectations existed, producing strong seasons and becoming a major target in the passing game. His NFL years included real production. He topped 1,000 receiving yards in 2007 and later had productive stretches with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Injuries interrupted parts of his path, including the well-known motorcycle crash early in his time in Cleveland, but overall he did enough on the field to establish himself as a legitimate starting tight end rather than a disappointment. The collapse came years after football. After stepping away from the NFL, Winslow became the subject of multiple criminal cases tied to sexual offenses. What initially surfaced as separate accusations expanded into something much broader, with prosecutors presenting a cycle of predatory behavior involving several victims. Charges included rape, kidnapping, and related offenses, pushing this far beyond anything connected to his playing days. In 2019, he was convicted on several counts, including rape and sexual battery, and the sentencing process ultimately resulted in a lengthy prison term. Winslow is currently in prison, and because the crimes happened after his football years, there was no league discipline attached to them. But that distinction doesn't matter much in the larger picture. His public identity is now defined overwhelmingly by the convictions rather than his production, making this another example of a football legacy being completely overtaken by what followed afterward. Daryl Henley. Daryl Henley looked like a steady, established defensive back. With the Los Angeles Rams, he built a reputation as a physical corner who could hold his own against starting receivers. He was not a superstar, but he was dependable enough to keep a real place in an NFL secondary, and his time in the league followed a fairly stable path on the surface. What was happening beneath that surface was far more serious. While still active in the NFL, Henley became involved in a large-scale cocaine trafficking operation. This was not a minor possession case or a personal use issue. Federal investigators uncovered an organized distribution network moving major quantities of drugs, and Henley's role connected directly to that system. The scale alone separated it from most athlete-related drug stories. His arrest in 1995 effectively ended any remaining football relevance immediately. There was no suspension timeline to follow, and no debate about a comeback. But what came next pushed the story even further. While awaiting sentencing, Henley tried to arrange a plan to kill the judge assigned to his case, an escalation that transformed this from a major trafficking prosecution into something even darker and more extreme. In 1996, he received a lengthy federal sentence stretching across decades. Daryl Henley is still in federal prison after his involvement in a major drug trafficking operation. Nearly all of his post-NFL life has been defined by prison rather than any transition into media, coaching, or public life. This section stands out because of the scale and escalation. It starts with organized criminal enterprise, then moves into an attempted judicial hit, showing a level of dissent that leaves football feeling almost irrelevant by comparison. Justin Blackmon. With Justin Blackmon, everything pointed toward long-term dominance at receiver. At Oklahoma State, he didn't just produce, he controlled games. Back-to-back Biletnikoff Awards, overwhelming yardage totals, and the ability to take over matchups made him one of the most decorated prospects at his position. The Jacksonville Jaguars used the 5th overall pick in 2012, expecting him to anchor their passing attack for years. Early results reinforced that expectation. Even within an unstable offense, he still generated over 800 yards as a rookie. The following year opened even stronger, with consecutive 100-yard outings, including a 190-yard performance that showed exactly what his ceiling looked like when everything clicked. The ability was undeniable. Nothing about his on-field output suggested a collapse was coming. Then the interruptions began. Multiple suspensions tied to the league's substance policy hit early, right during the window where most players build consistency. Instead of stacking seasons, he kept disappearing. Each absence reset progress, removed rhythm, and raised questions about whether he would return at all. By 2014, the situation escalated into an indefinite suspension, tilting the whole thing from temporary setbacks to complete uncertainty. What separates Blackmon from others is how everything ends, or doesn't. There was no final game, no formal retirement, no closing chapter. He simply faded out. Jacksonville held his rights for years, leaving the door open in theory, but nothing materialized. Justin Blackmon has been out of the NFL since 2013, after an indefinite suspension for repeated substance policy violations. And unlike many players who attempt comebacks, he never made a serious return to professional football. Over the years, there have been occasional reports about possible reinstatement, but none ever materialized into a real opportunity. And he has remained almost completely out of the public spotlight, with no involvement in media, coaching, or alternative leagues, making his story one of the clearest examples of a career that didn't end with a final moment, but simply disappeared. Martavis Bryant. Martavis Bryant didn't ease into the NFL. He arrived with impact. With the Pittsburgh Steelers, he immediately stretched defenses vertically, scoring 8 touchdowns in just 10 games as a rookie. His size-speed combination created mismatches that forced coverage adjustments every time he lined up. There was no gradual development. It was instant disruption that hinted at a future among the league's most dangerous deep threats. For a brief stretch, that projection held. In 2015, he built on that start, producing efficiently despite missing early games due to suspension. Even with that interruption, his big playability kept reinforcing the same idea. If everything aligned, the ceiling remained extremely high. But that early absence signaled something deeper that would continue to interfere. Then came the reset that changed everything. A full season suspension in 2016 removed him entirely during a critical stage of growth. When he returned, flashes still appeared, but consistency never fully stabilized. Frustration surfaced publicly as well, including comments about his role that added tension to an already fragile situation. A trade to the Raiders in 2018 offered another reset, but before anything could develop, another indefinite suspension erased that opportunity completely. What defines Bryant's situation isn't just the suspensions, it's the timing. Every interruption came right when momentum was building. Instead of progression, everything kept restarting from zero. Martavis Bryant has remained active in football, but never found his way back into a stable NFL role after repeated suspensions for substance policy violations, spending time in leagues like the CFL and XFL while trying to rebuild his career. Despite still showing flashes of the deep threat ability that made him dangerous early on with the Pittsburgh Steelers, teams have not committed to bringing him back long-term, leaving him in a position where he is still chasing football opportunities outside the NFL, rather than re-establishing himself at the highest level. Ricky Williams. Ricky Williams operated as one of the most productive backs in the NFL. With the Miami Dolphins, he delivered a 1,853-yard rushing season in 2002, leading the league and carrying a heavy workload in an era built around feature runners. His style blended patience, vision, and physicality, allowing him to control games through volume and efficiency. Nothing about his performance suggested instability or decline. The conflict didn't come from performance. It came from a deeper mismatch between personal choices and league expectations. Williams repeatedly violated the substance policy, primarily tied to marijuana use, leading to multiple suspensions. But unlike other cases driven by escalation or criminal behavior, this reflected a philosophical disconnect. He spoke openly about pressure, identity, and how he viewed the game differently from what the NFL demanded. The defining moment came in 2004. At the height of his career, he stepped away from football entirely just before the season began. There was no forced removal. It was a personal decision to leave. walking away from a central role and significant contract. That move shocked the sport because it went against everything expected from a player in that position. He eventually returned, but interruptions continued. Missed seasons, suspensions, and repeated absences prevented long-term continuity, even though his production remained strong whenever he played. Over time, perception changed as league policies evolved, casting it in a different light. Ricky Williams has completely transitioned away from football and built a new life centered around wellness, cannabis, and holistic health, becoming an entrepreneur in the cannabis industry and a public speaker focused on mental health and personal growth. Unlike many players whose careers ended in chaos, Williams leaned into the same lifestyle choices that once led to suspensions and turned them into a business and identity outside the NFL, where he remains active and visible today. Terry Glenn. Drafted by the New England Patriots in 1996, Terry Glenn delivered over 1,100 receiving yards as a rookie, establishing himself as a primary option right away. His separation, route precision, and speed made him difficult to contain, and early returns suggested a long stretch of elite production ahead. But his path never settled into consistency. Time in New England grew increasingly unstable due to suspensions, injuries, and off-field friction that disrupted continuity. At one point, he was suspended for violating organizational rules, and tension between him and leadership continued to build. A move to the Green Bay Packers followed, but injuries limited his impact, preventing any real reset from taking hold. He later found another strong stretch with the Dallas Cowboys. There, he produced multiple 1,000-yard seasons, showing what his trajectory could have looked like with stability. That period matters because it proves the ability never disappeared. Talent was never the issue. Continuity was. Instead of a sustained peak, his timeline became a series of strong runs, separated by interruptions. It doesn't end with a dramatic moment. It fades through inconsistency rather than collapse. Terry Glenn passed away in 2017 following a car accident, bringing an end to a life that had begun shifting toward mentoring and coaching younger players after his NFL career. Meaning his story doesn't have a long post-football chapter like others on this list, with his legacy tied to both his on-field production and the instability that followed him during different stretches of his career. Clinton Portis. Clinton Portis delivered consistent output as a feature back. With the Denver Broncos and later the Washington Redskins, he built a reputation as a durable runner capable of handling heavy workloads. Multiple 1,000-yard seasons and a central role in Washington's offense made him a recognizable name across the league. His on-field profile reflected reliability and physicality. The move came after retirement. Portis became linked to a large-scale healthcare fraud scheme involving former NFL players. The case centered on false claims submitted for medical equipment that was never needed or received, exploiting a system designed to support retired athletes. Investigators uncovered a network involving multiple individuals with millions of dollars tied to fraudulent filings. This was not an isolated mistake. It involved coordination, fabricated documentation, and repeated submissions over time. Portis was identified as a participant, and the case moved through federal court as part of a broader investigation. That scale matters because it shows how organized the operation was, rather than something accidental or misunderstood. In 2022, he was sentenced to prison after pleading guilty. That moment reshaped how his name is remembered. Instead of rushing totals and offensive impact, his legacy became tied to financial crime and legal consequences. Clinton Portis has since been released after serving time in federal prison for his role in an NFL healthcare fraud scheme, and is now working to rebuild his life, while occasionally speaking publicly about his mistakes and experiences. His football career is long over, and his current path is centered on moving forward after legal consequences, rather than any return to the sport. Joe Horn. Joe Horn built his reputation through consistent production. With the New Orleans Saints, he became a primary target, earning Pro Bowl recognition and establishing himself as a reliable presence in the passing game. His visibility came from performance and memorable moments that defined his time in the league. After football, his name resurfaced in a different context. Horn was also linked to the same healthcare fraud investigation that involved Clinton Portis and several other former players. The scheme revolved around submitting false claims for expensive medical equipment through the NFL's benefits program, taking advantage of a system meant to support retirees. What makes this case stand out is its scope. This wasn't about one individual making a single decision. It involved a network of former players participating in repeated claims over time. Horn's involvement placed him within that broader operation, showing how widespread the issue had become across multiple names and roles. While his legal outcome differed from others involved, the connection still altered his post-football narrative. Joe Horn remains active in media and public appearances, often speaking about football and staying connected to the sport. But his name is also tied to the healthcare fraud case that involved multiple former players, meaning his post-NFL life includes both continued visibility and the lasting association with that investigation, rather than a completely clean transition into retirement. Correll Buckhalter. During his playing years, Correll Buckhalter built value through reliability and versatility. With the Philadelphia Eagles, he operated within a rotation, contributing as both a runner and receiver. Later, with the Denver Broncos, he delivered efficient production, including a 1,000-yard season in 2009. He never stood as a headline figure, but he consistently provided dependable output within structured systems. After football, his path didn't close quietly. Buckhalter became linked to the same healthcare fraud investigation that involved multiple former NFL players. The scheme centered on submitting false claims for expensive medical equipment through the league's benefits program. These weren't minor claims. High-value items were listed that were never needed or delivered, creating millions in fraudulent payouts across the group. What defines his involvement is how it reflects the reach of the operation. It extended beyond a few high-profile names. It extended across a broader group of former players, each participating within a coordinated system built on repeated claims and documentation. Buckhalter's role placed him inside that network, showing how widespread the scheme became beyond just a handful of recognizable figures. The legal process brought consequences. He pleaded guilty, acknowledging participation in the fraud. That moment changed his post-football narrative entirely, linking his name to federal charges rather than on-field contributions. Correll Buckhalter has largely stayed out of the public spotlight following his involvement in the same NFL healthcare fraud case, with no major media presence or return to football-related roles, making his post-career life relatively quiet compared to others, but still permanently connected to the legal issues that emerged after his playing days ended. Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick operated as a dynamic quarterback capable of changing how defenses approach the game. With the San Francisco 49ers, he stepped into the starting role and immediately transformed the offense through mobility and arm strength. In 2012, he led the franchise to Super Bowl 47, followed by another deep playoff run the next year. His ability to extend plays and create outside structure made him one of the most difficult quarterbacks to prepare for during that stretch. The change didn't come from performance alone. In 2016, he began kneeling during the national anthem to protest racial injustice and police brutality. What started as a personal decision quickly expanded into a national conversation, drawing both support and criticism. The discussion moved far beyond football, placing his name at the center of a broader cultural debate. From a football standpoint, things became complicated. After the 2016 season, he opted out of his contract and entered free agency. Under normal conditions, a quarterback with his experience would attract interest, even as a backup option. That interest never came. As time passed, the absence became more noticeable, moving the narrative toward the idea that he had been effectively shut out despite remaining eligible. He later filed a grievance alleging collusion among NFL organizations, which was settled in 2019. Even after that, no opportunity materialized. Colin Kaepernick has remained out of the NFL since the end of the 2016 season. His life after football expanded into a much larger platform, rather than fading away, as he built a full career around activism, media, and business. Through his organization, Know Your Rights Camp, he funds programs focused on social justice, education, and community support, while also partnering with Nike on long-term campaigns that kept him commercially visible even without playing, including major ad campaigns and apparel lines. He also moved into content production through projects like the Netflix series Colin in Black and White, which expanded his influence beyond sports into storytelling and media. Johnny Manziel. When Johnny Manziel entered the NFL, attention followed at a level rarely seen for a rookie. At Texas A&M, he won the Heisman Trophy and built a national profile through improvisation and playmaking that didn't fit traditional quarterback molds. The Cleveland Browns selected him in the first round of the 2014 draft, expecting that style to translate into long-term success at the professional level. The transition didn't hold. On the field, inconsistency defined his performances, and he never secured a stable starting role. But the larger issues existed away from competition. Reports of partying, missed obligations, and lack of preparation raised concerns about his commitment to development. Instead of building structure, instability began to shape everything around him. That instability escalated quickly. In 2015, multiple off-field incidents, including a domestic violence investigation, brought significant attention. Even when legal outcomes didn't result in long-term penalties, the behavior reinforced concerns about reliability and accountability. Cleveland reached a point where the off-field issues outweighed any remaining upside. In March 2016, he was released, and no organization brought him back. Attempts to restart his path through alternative leagues showed flashes of ability, but never created lasting momentum. Johnny Manziel has remained active in the public space since leaving the NFL, but his football journey after that point never led back to the league, despite multiple attempts, including time with the Hamilton Tiger Cats and later the Montreal Alouettes in the CFL, where he struggled to secure a long-term role and was eventually released, followed by a stint with the Memphis Express in the short-lived Alliance of American Football, where he showed flashes, but the league itself folded before any real momentum could build. After those attempts, he stepped away from pursuing an NFL return and shifted toward business ventures, media appearances, and speaking openly about mental health, lifestyle changes, and the pressure that came with his rapid rise, maintaining visibility through interviews and partnerships rather than competition. Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown operated at a level few receivers have ever sustained. With the Pittsburgh Steelers, he delivered 6 straight seasons over 1,200 receiving yards, combining route precision, separation, and chemistry with Ben Roethlisberger into relentless consistency. He was not just productive, he defined what elite output looked like at the position during that stretch. It didn't begin with a single moment. It built over time. Tension with coaches, missed practices, and sideline disagreements started surfacing, creating a growing sense that something was changing behind the scenes. By 2019, the situation escalated to the point where Pittsburgh moved on, sending him to the Oakland Raiders in what was supposed to be a fresh start. That reset collapsed almost instantly. Before playing a regular season snap for Oakland, he became the center of multiple controversies: helmet disputes, fines, missed sessions, and a confrontation with management that ended with his release. The New England Patriots signed him shortly after, but that window closed within weeks following misconduct allegations. Later, he resurfaced with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, contributing to a Super Bowl 55 run, briefly stabilizing everything. Then came the final moment. In January 2022, during a game against the New York Jets, he removed his uniform mid-game and walked off the field. The scene played out live, chaotic and abrupt. That moment effectively ended his NFL path. After leaving the league, Antonio Brown tried to stay tied to football through ownership, most notably with the Albany Empire in arena football. But that situation collapsed quickly and publicly when the team's tenure under his ownership ended amid major operational problems and league action. Since then, his public presence has centered mostly on social media, music, interviews, and recurring controversy, rather than any structured football role. The biggest current development is legal. Brown is facing a second-degree attempted murder charge in Florida, tied to a May 2025 shooting incident outside a boxing event in Miami, and the Associated Press reported that he pleaded not guilty, was granted bail, and was ordered to wear a GPS monitor while the case proceeds. Plaxico Burress. For years, Plaxico Burress delivered in critical moments. With the New York Giants, he played a central role in one of the most significant upsets in league history, catching the game-winning touchdown in Super Bowl 42 against the New England Patriots. At that stage, he wasn't just productive, he had already proven himself on the biggest stage. Everything changed in 2008. While at a nightclub in New York, a firearm he was carrying accidentally discharged, striking him in the leg. The injury itself posed no life-threatening risk, but the legal consequences were immediate. Strict state gun laws meant he faced serious charges due to not having a proper permit. What could have been contained in another context quickly escalated into a criminal case. The Giants suspended him, and the legal process moved forward. Burress eventually pleaded guilty to illegal firearm possession and received a 2-year prison sentence. That moment removed him from the league during what should have been a continuation of his prime. Unlike gradual declines, this was a single event that instantly changed direction. Plaxico Burress stepped away from football after serving his prison sentence and completing a short return stint with the New York Jets in 2011, and since then has built a post-NFL life centered around media appearances, football analysis, and public speaking, where he often reflects on the decision that interrupted his prime years, with no further attempts to return to the league, meaning his current position is that of a former player who stayed connected to the sport through commentary rather than competition, with his career permanently defined by a single moment that shifted everything. Adam Pac-Man Jones. From the beginning, Adam Pac-Man Jones combined high-level ability with volatility. Drafted by the Tennessee Titans in 2005, he showed immediate impact as both a cornerback and return specialist. Speed, instincts, and playmaking ability gave him the tools to become a major contributor early. But issues off the field followed just as quickly. Multiple legal situations, including altercations at nightclubs, kept bringing attention. The most serious case came in 2007, tied to a shooting at a Las Vegas strip club that left a man paralyzed. While Jones wasn't charged with the shooting itself, his involvement in the surrounding events led to major consequences. The NFL responded with a full-season suspension in 2007. That decision marked one of the strongest disciplinary actions at the time, reinforcing stricter enforcement. Even after reinstatement, additional incidents led to more suspensions and continued scrutiny throughout his time in the league. Despite everything, he managed to rebuild part of his path with the Cincinnati Bengals. There, he contributed consistently, showing that stability, when maintained, allowed his ability to translate. Adam Pac-Man Jones has remained active and visible after retirement, working across media platforms, interviews, and entertainment appearances, while occasionally stepping into combat sports-related events, maintaining a consistent public presence that reflects his personality during his playing days, with his current life not tied to coaching or rebuilding a football career, but instead centered on staying relevant in media and public discussions, showing a transition where the spotlight never really left even after football did. Henry Ruggs III. Henry Ruggs III was still at the beginning of what looked like a promising path. Drafted by the Las Vegas Raiders in 2020, his elite speed gave him the ability to stretch defenses in ways few could match. By his second season, he was starting to show real development, creating big plays and building chemistry within the offense. Then, everything changed in November 2021. Ruggs was driving at extremely high speed through Las Vegas when his vehicle collided with another car, resulting in the death of a young woman and her dog. Details from the investigation made the case even more severe, including reports of speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour and a blood alcohol level well above the legal limit. The response came immediately. The Raiders released him within hours. There was no waiting period or extended evaluation. The severity made the decision clear. his NFL path ended before any formal league discipline was even required. From a legal standpoint, the case moved quickly. Ruggs faced felony DUI charges resulting in death and later reached a plea agreement that led to a prison sentence. Henry Ruggs III is currently serving a prison sentence in Nevada after the 2021 crash that ended his NFL career. His life now exists entirely within the correctional system, rather than any public-facing transition, meaning his day-to-day reality is now structured around incarceration, legal restrictions, and limited contact with the outside world, rather than football or business ventures. There have been occasional updates noting that he is eligible for parole after serving a portion of his sentence, but even that does not change the larger picture. There is no realistic path back to the NFL, no ongoing connection to the sport, and no second career developing in public view. His situation is defined by long-term consequences rather than transition, making him one of the clearest examples on this list of a player whose life shifted completely away from football and into a controlled legal environment with no return trajectory. Josh Shaw. When Josh Shaw got drafted into the NFL, gambling policies were already strict, but enforcement hadn't fully reached its modern level. A defensive back who spent time with the Cincinnati Bengals and the Arizona Cardinals, he built his role through reliability rather than star-level production. His position depended on consistency and trust. In 2020, that changed. The NFL announced that Shaw had been suspended through at least the 2021 season for betting on NFL games. That detail immediately elevated the case because it directly challenged the integrity of competition, something the league prioritizes above everything else. His punishment became a clear example. He was the first player in decades to receive such a severe penalty, specifically for wagering on NFL games. The league didn't hesitate or gradually escalate. The response came firm and immediate, reinforcing zero tolerance in the modern era. What makes this case important is its impact moving forward. Later suspensions tied to gambling traced back to this moment as a precedent. Shaw's story connects earlier gambling cases to the present, showing how enforcement has evolved into something far more direct and unforgiving. Josh Shaw has been out of the NFL since his indefinite suspension for betting on league games, and despite the possibility of reinstatement in similar cases, he never secured another opportunity with any team, leaving his career effectively frozen at the moment of that violation, with no transition into coaching, media, or alternative leagues, and very little public presence since, making his current position one where football ended abruptly without a second phase. Quintez Cephus. Quintez Cephus wasn't a headline name, but he showed flashes, physical play, contested catches, and the ability to contribute in key situations. His role was still forming, with potential for growth if consistency followed. That development was interrupted in 2023. The NFL suspended Cephus for gambling violations, specifically tied to bets placed on league games. By this point, enforcement had already shifted into a stricter phase, influenced by earlier cases that established clear boundaries. The response reflected that direction. Cephus was released by Detroit, and his path forward became uncertain almost immediately. Unlike earlier eras where consequences might have been staggered, the modern approach leaves little room for recovery once violations are confirmed. This represents the current version of league discipline. There's no gradual escalation anymore. The rules are clear, and enforcement follows quickly. For Cephus, that meant a developing path was halted before it could fully take shape, placing him among the newest examples of how strict the modern NFL has become regarding gambling. Quintez Cephus has been reinstated after serving his gambling suspension and is currently in the process of trying to return to the NFL, but without a guaranteed roster spot or established role, meaning his situation remains uncertain as he works to rebuild trust with teams and prove he can contribute again, placing him in a position where his career is not over, but is no longer secure, with his present focused entirely on regaining a foothold rather than building forward momentum. Calvin Ridley. At the moment everything changed. Calvin Ridley was already established as a top option with the Atlanta Falcons. A 1,374-yard campaign in 2020 placed him among the most productive receivers in the league, built on sharp route execution and consistent separation. He was not developing anymore. He had already reached a level where expectations centered on sustained elite output. Before the gambling issue surfaced, his timeline had already paused. In 2021, Ridley stepped away from football to focus on mental health, creating uncertainty around his future. While he was away, the next development occurred, one that would completely reshape his trajectory moving forward. In 2022, the NFL suspended him for the entire season. The reason was betting on league games while away from the team. Reports indicated the wagers didn't involve contests he participated in, and there was no evidence of manipulation. That distinction didn't matter. The rule is absolute. Any betting tied to NFL games crosses a line the league enforces strictly. Calvin Ridley is fully back in the NFL and actively playing, but his career path was significantly altered by the suspension that removed him for an entire season during his prime as a top receiver in football. Following reinstatement in 2023, he was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he returned as a starting level player and showed he could still produce at a high level despite the time away. His current situation is different from most players on this list because he successfully rebuilt his career rather than being pushed out of the league. But the suspension still reshaped his trajectory by costing him a full year of development and forcing a reset in a new environment, meaning he is now an active NFL player again, though with a career that took a major interruption rather than continuing uninterrupted. Vontaze Burfict. For years, Vontaze Burfict played right on the edge of what the NFL would tolerate. With the Cincinnati Bengals, he developed into a highly effective linebacker, combining instincts with physical play that disrupted offenses. At his best, he could take over stretches of games through sheer aggression and awareness. That same aggression created constant scrutiny. Illegal hits, late contact, and repeated violations of safety rules kept bringing attention. These weren't isolated moments. They stretched across multiple seasons, building a record that the league tracked closely. Each fine and suspension added another layer to that history. The turning point came in 2019. While playing for the Oakland Raiders, he delivered a helmet-to-helmet hit that resulted in immediate ejection. The NFL responded with an indefinite suspension, citing not just that play, but everything leading up to it. This wasn't about one moment. It was the accumulation of years of violations. That decision effectively ended his time in the league. He later applied for reinstatement, but no opportunity followed. Vontaze Burfict has remained out of the NFL since his indefinite suspension in 2019, and despite applying for reinstatement, he has not returned to any roster, leaving his career effectively ended due to the accumulation of on-field violations rather than a single incident. With no transition into coaching or a major media role, and a relatively low public profile since, marking a clear separation from the league after years of disciplinary issues. Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson was viewed as one of the most valuable quarterbacks in the NFL. With the Houston Texans, he produced at a high level, combining passing ability with mobility to create a dynamic offensive presence. His trajectory pointed toward long-term elite status at the position. Then the allegations surfaced. Multiple civil lawsuits accused Watson of misconduct during massage therapy sessions, creating one of the most complex and widely discussed situations the league had faced. The volume of accusations and the details involved pushed the case into national attention. The NFL conducted its own investigation. The result was an 11-game suspension, along with a financial penalty. That punishment was significant, but it stopped short of permanently removing him from the league. That distinction is what separates this case from many others in your video. Deshaun Watson remains active in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns after serving his suspension, continuing to play as a starting quarterback while his career moves forward within the league, making his situation distinct from many others on this list, as he did not lose his place in football despite the controversy, and instead continues operating at the professional level with his current focus centered on performance rather than any absence from the sport. Kansas City Chiefs. At the center of Kansas City's modern rise is Patrick Mahomes, a quarterback whose play under pressure reshaped expectations for the position. His off-platform throws, rare arm strength, and instinct for extending broken plays turned chaos into scoring opportunities for Kansas City Chiefs. That influence lifted the franchise into a higher competitive tier, where offensive creativity consistently strains defensive structure. This stretch marks the clearest separation between earlier eras and the team's current authority. Within the passing attack of Kansas City Chiefs, Travis Kelce has emerged as a tight end who operates as a constant mismatch that defenses struggle to solve. His route precision forces coverage breakdowns and creates space across the field, while a long-developed connection with Patrick Mahomes sustains rare timing and trust across multiple seasons. That partnership sits at the core of how Kansas City establishes rhythm and continuity on offense. The bridge to the franchise's early championship foundation runs through Len Dawson, a quarterback who guided Kansas City Chiefs through AFL success and a Super Bowl IV victory. His calm leadership in high-pressure moments set a lasting standard with the franchise, while his accuracy and control reflected a more structured style of execution compared to today's tempo-driven systems. That legacy remains a critical pillar in the team's long-term progression. On the defensive side, Derek Thomas, a pass rusher, brought a level of disruption capable of shifting momentum on any snap. His explosive speed off the edge and an ability to collapse pockets forced hurried decisions from opposing quarterbacks. That presence balanced a franchise often associated with offensive numbers by reinforcing defensive credibility. Together, these figures trace a clear progression across eras: foundation, defensive impact, offensive evolution, and the modern peak. Dallas Cowboys. During their championship era, Emmitt Smith emerged as a rushing force whose output on the field set the all-time standard. His steady presence in controlling tempo allowed the offense to dominate possession throughout the 1990s, especially during title runs. In high-pressure playoff environments, Emmitt Smith's reliability and execution remained consistent, providing the foundation for sustained success. That level of output operated as the engine behind the team's extended supremacy. While Emmitt Smith emerged as a rushing force, Troy Aikman functioned with structure, efficiency, and composure at the center of Dallas Cowboys' offense. His decision-making minimized risk while keeping the system operating at a high level, even without reliance on overwhelming statistical output. In critical moments, Troy Aikman's control and poise ensured that championship opportunities converted into results. His playmaking served as the stabilizing force for the entire offensive unit. Within the passing game of the Dallas Cowboys, Michael Irvin carried a different edge, driven by a receiver whose physicality and competitive intensity shaped the unit's tone. During his time with the Cowboys, he won contested catches and imposed a presence across the field that elevated the overall performance of the Dallas Cowboys. That mindset extended beyond individual plays, influencing the team's emotional direction during its most successful stretches. His added edge reinforced an identity that surpassed scheme and production alone. In Dallas Cowboys' modern era, Micah Parsons introduces a new dimension to the franchise's legacy. His versatility as both a pass rusher and open field disruptor places constant stress on offensive protection schemes. The impact that Micah Parsons brings has restored a level of defensive dynamism not consistently sustained in recent decades. Combined, these elements connect dynasty-era control with modern explosiveness, forming a complete picture of Dallas's evolution. Green Bay Packers. The earliest championship era in Green Bay was built on controlled execution and disciplined decision-making at quarterback through Bart Starr. His leadership within a structured offensive system allowed the team to thrive under pressure, setting a lasting benchmark for how the position would be measured within the franchise. That period established the first long-term standard of sustained success. A later chapter introduced a far more aggressive and risk-heavy passing style through Brett Favre that reshaped the offense's personality. His durability and willingness to attack downfield created a mix of high-impact plays and consistent winning stretches. That unpredictability defined a new phase of competitiveness while keeping the team relevant year after year. Another evolution followed with Aaron Rodgers and his shift toward precision and calculated control. Quick defensive recognition paired with accurate throws under pressure translated into reliable late-game execution. Efficiency remained at an elite level across multiple seasons of playoff contention, emphasizing timing, discipline, and careful decision-making. Balancing these offensive eras, Reggie White transformed the front line into a constant disruptive force. His strength as a pass rusher altered game flow, while his leadership elevated the unit during championship pursuits. Together, these elements highlight alternating phases of quarterback evolution, reinforced by elite defensive impact. Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore's defensive legacy centers on Ray Lewis, a linebacker whose presence dictated both emotion and structure across the entire unit. His communication, alignment, and intensity all flowed through that role, setting a tone built on physical and disciplined execution during championship runs. That influence shaped the foundation of the franchise's early success. In the secondary, Ed Reed's anticipation and turnover creation introduced a constant threat to opposing offenses. His capacity to read quarterback intentions allowed momentum to shift in an instant, while positioning limited opportunities in the deep passing game. The impact that he brought to the field disrupted rhythm and forced offenses to adjust their approach on every snap. On the offensive side, Jonathan Ogden brought with him steadiness along the line and provided the balance needed during defense-driven seasons. The protection he provided at left tackle ensured that both passing and rushing systems could function effectively against top competition. His size and refined technique created consistency that allowed the offense to complement the team's dominant defense. Lamar Jackson introduces a modern offensive direction built on mobility and dual-threat talent. As a quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar has showcased talent to extend plays and stress defensive structure, and this adds a layer of unpredictability that contrasts with earlier eras. His time at the Ravens has introduced a faster-paced offensive approach while maintaining competitive balance. Together, these elements trace a progression across control, disruption, and innovation. San Francisco 49ers. Calm execution under pressure defines Joe Montana's quarterback play that anchored San Francisco's championship runs. Montana brought with him precise timing and disciplined decision-making that kept the 49ers' offense operating efficiently, especially in critical late-game situations. The control he showed during high-stakes moments set a lasting benchmark for postseason performance. Steve Young carried the next stage with mobility and accurate passing under pressure. He was able to extend plays while maintaining efficiency under center, bringing a new layer to the 49ers' offense while allowing it to adapt beyond a strictly structured approach. His style of play carried the San Francisco 49ers' competitive standard forward, blending movement with precision. Jerry Rice stands as the most consistent receiving force in San Francisco 49ers history. He brought with him unmatched consistency that created long-term offensive cohesion. His route precision and reliability ensured sustained production, regardless of changes at quarterback. Jerry Rice's presence functioned as a constant, reinforcing dominance across multiple seasons for the 49ers. Nick Bosa represents modern defensive pressure through consistent disruption of opposing offenses. His potential to collapse pockets adds balance to a historically offense-driven legacy. Bosa introduces a defensive anchor into a quarterback-heavy history. Together, this group spans offensive leadership, receiving excellence, and modern defensive strength. Pittsburgh Steelers. Joe Green seats at the heart of Pittsburgh's defensive foundation that is built on physical edge at the line of scrimmage. His presence allowed the Steelers to create a strong unit called the Steel Curtain Defense that dictated game flow through their defensive prowess. Together, the Steel Curtain defensive approach set a lasting standard for toughness and consistency across the franchise. During those championship runs, a quarterback by the name Terry Bradshaw provided the necessary balance to a defense-driven identity that the Pittsburgh Steelers had. Bradshaw's execution in high-pressure playoff environments translated into multiple Super Bowl victories for the Steelers, with a system centered on control rather than excess risk. That role completed the structure of a dynasty built on complementary football. A later defensive evolution, driven by Troy Polamalu, added unpredictability through instinctive playmaking across the field. Troy Polamalu's knack to disrupt offensive plans from multiple alignments created sudden momentum swings, whether through turnovers or key stops. The style of play that he brought expanded the Pittsburgh Steelers' versatility while maintaining its aggressive edge. In the modern era, consistent edge pressure continues to uphold the franchise's defensive standard through T.J. Watt. Regular disruption of offensive timing through pass rushing productivity by T.J. Watt keeps the Steelers' defensive standard identity active today. Together, these elements reflect a long-standing commitment to defensive strength, reinforced by timely and effective quarterback execution. New England Patriots. Bill Belichick forms the structural core of New England's dynasty through strategic planning and adaptability. Throughout his time with the Patriots, he made weekly adjustments and evolved the team's defensive schemes to create a sustained competitive edge, even as rosters shifted over time. That system, created by Belichick, consistently maximized available talent and established a framework for long-term success across multiple seasons. At quarterback, Tom Brady's elite execution under pressure turned close contests for the New England Patriots into victories across their championship run. Tom Brady's precise decision-making and accuracy in critical moments defined the Patriots under Bill Belichick, while his longevity ensured the system remained effective across changing eras. That presence served as the central force driving the offense for years. Within the passing game, a tight end by the name Rob Gronkowski introduced a level of physical superiority that reshaped defensive planning. His size and athleticism created persistent matchup problems for other teams in the league, while his reliability in key postseason situations elevated performance when it mattered most. That impact expanded overall offensive efficiency, particularly in crucial drives. Adam Vinatieri added the final layer through consistent execution in high-pressure moments. His clutch field goals secured pivotal playoff wins and directly influenced championship outcomes. Vinatieri brought with him reliability that reinforced the importance of kicking skill within a complete team structure. Together, these elements highlight system design for the New England Patriots, quarterback excellence, matchup disruption, and decisive execution. Buffalo Bills. Buffalo's modern surge is driven by Josh Allen, a quarterback who has reshaped expectations for the position within the franchise. Allen's arm strength, mobility under pressure, and potential to turn broken plays into positive gains have pushed the team into consistent contention season after season. The influence that he brings signals a shift toward a more aggressive, high-output offensive approach, redefining what weekly competitiveness looks like. Jim Kelly anchored an earlier era of sustained postseason success, built on command of a fast-paced, timing-based system that kept defenses under constant pressure. He operated the Bills' K-gun offense with precision, allowing for efficient execution. With him under center, the Bills reached 4 consecutive Super Bowl appearances, marking a rare stretch of command, even without a title. The leadership he brought established a lasting standard for resilience in high-stakes environments. Within that same window, Buffalo enjoyed versatility in the backfield thanks to Thurman Thomas. This created a constant challenge for opposing defenses. Thomas offered the Bills dual-threat contribution as both runner and receiver, keeping drives alive and adding flexibility to an already fast-moving offense. During his time with the Bills, he served as a reliable outlet in multiple situations. That role became central to maintaining offensive rhythm and balance. Defensively, Bruce Smith's consistent pass-rushing pressure provided the counterweight to a high-scoring offense. Week after week, he was able to disrupt opposing quarterbacks across multiple seasons, anchored the unit, and reinforced overall team strength. His stats and longevity kept that presence at the center of the defense during peak years. Together, these elements connect a historic period of sustained contention with the franchise's modern resurgence. Miami Dolphins. Miami's offensive history is shaped by Dan Marino, a quarterback whose numbers redefined passing expectations for his era. Marino's quick release, paired with his high-volume output, placed constant pressure on defenses, forcing structural adjustments across entire game plans. Even without a championship finish, he sustained statistical excellence that kept the team competitive across multiple seasons and influenced how offensive systems were designed. With Larry Csonka on board, the Dolphins' earliest championship foundation was built on a physically dominant rushing approach. Csonka's power running in short yardage and goal line situations controlled tempo and stabilized critical moments. That style supported a historic perfect season and reflected a football identity rooted in discipline, toughness, and control at the point of attack. On the defensive side, consistent edge pressure by Jason Taylor created disruption that shaped opponent strategy over many years. His speed off the line generated turnover opportunities and forced quarterbacks into rushed decisions. That level of output provided a reliable defensive anchor throughout multiple seasons, helping define the pass-rushing standard for the franchise in the modern era. Tyreek Hill brought with him a newer offensive dimension, defined by explosive vertical speed that stretches defenses horizontally and vertically. With Hill in the team, coverage schemes shift before the snap to account for his field-spanning threats, opening space for the entire offense. His presence has reworked how opposing secondaries structure their positioning. Together, these elements connect early control, elite passing, defensive disruption, and modern, speed-driven offense. Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia's defensive history is shaped by Reggie White's edge presence that consistently disrupted offensive game plans. White's power, technique, and relentless pressure allowed opposing lines little structures, often dictating the flow of entire games. That level of command set an early standard for pass-rushing excellence within the franchise and remains a benchmark for excellence at the position. In the secondary, intensity and versatility defined Brian Dawkins, a player capable of influencing every phase of the defense. His coverage proficiency, combined with run support, created a wide-ranging impact, while his communication and energy helped set the tone across multiple seasons for the Eagles. Dawkins' presence became central to the unit's identity, reinforcing a hard-nosed approach that carried through different roster eras. Earlier franchise history is tied to Chuck Bednarik. He possessed a rare level of two-way contribution that reflects a more demanding era of football. The durability and physical style he brought allowed consistent involvement on both sides of the ball, linking foundational years of the organization to its modern development. That connection helps frame the long-term evolution of the Philadelphia Eagles' identity. With Jalen Hurts under center, the Eagles' current offensive direction is built on mobility, control under pressure, and dual-threat execution. He creates constant stress on defensive schemes thanks to his knack to extend plays and attack in multiple phases. His leadership in high-stakes moments has elevated the team into sustained postseason contention. Together, these elements reflect a transition from defensive strength into a balanced modern structure. New York Giants. Lawrence Taylor's disruptive edge presence defines the peak of New York's defensive legacy, forcing offensive systems to constantly redesign protection schemes. Taylor's speed, combined with overwhelming power, changed how entire game plans were built, extending influence beyond statistics into league-wide defensive strategy. That impact remains the central reference point for defensive dominance in franchise history. That defensive tradition continues through sustained performance from Michael Strahan, another elite pass rusher who turned consistency into record-setting achievement. Strahan offered reliable pressure across multiple seasons, strengthened the Giants' defensive front, and maintained a high standard for quarterback disruption. This continuity carried the franchise's pass-rushing identity into the modern era. On the offensive side, Eli Manning gave the New York Giants championship success. his calm execution under postseason pressure delivered some of the most pivotal wins in franchise history. While Manning's regular season output varied, his performance in critical playoff moments defined his legacy more than volume statistics. The composure he brought on the field provided a counterbalance to an identity often driven by defensive strength. A modern offensive addition in Saquon Barkley introduces speed, agility, and open field explosiveness that shifts how defenses are structured. Barkley's big play skill added unpredictability and expanded offensive construction into more dynamic formations for the New York Giants. That presence reflects a broader evolution in offensive design. Los Angeles Rams. Aaron Donald's interior disruption defines the modern defensive standard of the Los Angeles Rams, where constant penetration into the backfield forces offenses to rebuild protection schemes on every snap. That level of consistency across multiple seasons establishes a benchmark for defensive performance and places pressure on timing, spacing, and play design at its core. Earlier offensive history is shaped by Eric Dickerson, a running back whose combination of vision and acceleration produced elite rushing output in his early career. Dickerson's consistent mastery to break through defensive fronts turned early down situations into explosive gains for the Rams, setting a long-standing reference point for running back and offensive impact. Marshall Faulk brought an offensive evolution to the Rams that introduced a more versatile backfield role that blended rushing strength with receiving numbers. The adaptability that Faulk brought in created matchup problems for defenses and increased overall offensive efficiency within high-scoring systems. The shift reflected a broader move toward multi-purpose offensive usage across formations and play designs. Modern offensive structure for the Rams was defined by Cooper Kupp, a wide receiver who offered precision route execution and timing-based performance within critical moments. His reliable connection with Matthew Stafford enhanced efficiency in high-pressure situations, particularly during postseason drives. That consistency strengthens the overall offensive structure. Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson served as the offensive centerpiece that defined Seattle's modern competitive run through play extension, pocket awareness, and deep ball accuracy. During his time with the Seahawks, he was able to evade pressure consistently, keeping drives alive and sustaining output across peak seasons. That style of play helped position the team as a steady postseason presence and shaped its identity during its most successful stretch. Marshawn Lynch's power running provided the physical counterbalance Seahawks desired at the time. Through Lynch, the Seahawks were able to control game tempo and also wear down defenses in key moments. His gift of breaking tackles and pushing through contact turned difficult situations into manageable gains, especially in postseason environments. That ground control added cohesion to the offensive structure and supported balance against the passing game. Walter Jones anchored the offensive line with strong protection and run-blocking consistency. His mastery to neutralize pass rushers gave the offense control. His long-term presence ensured structural reliability up front. He supported both passing and rushing systems effectively. In the secondary, Richard Sherman's coverage intelligence and communication anchored the defensive strength and shaped opposing teams' game plans. With him in the lineup, the Seahawks defense was able to limit passing options and coordinate coverage schemes that forced offenses into conservative approaches. His leadership within the unit reinforced defensive cohesion. Chicago Bears. Walter Payton, a durable offensive cornerstone, defined the Chicago Bears' ground identity through consistent rushing output built on balance, vision, and endurance. The numbers Payton brought to the Bears held steady, even in physically demanding systems and low-scoring environments, allowing the offense to remain competitive across difficult stretches. That level of reliability placed this role at the center of the team's offensive history. Dick Butkus's time with the Bears brought a defining defensive presence that established the tone for linebacker play through relentless tackling and control of the middle of the field. His physicality and aggression shaped how opposing offenses approached interior runs and short passing lanes. That impact set a long-standing standard for defensive intensity within the Bears franchise. That tradition continued through Mike Singletary, a championship-caliber linebacker whose awareness and leadership elevated overall coordination on Chicago's defense. His quick recognition of formations improved reaction speed across the unit, strengthening consistency in high-pressure situations. Singletary's role in the team helped sustain elite defensive performance during competitive peak years. A later evolution, introduced by Brian Urlacher, expanded range and coverage to meet the demands of modern pass-heavy offenses. Brian Urlacher's versatility allowed adaptation across multiple defensive schemes, bridging earlier physical styles with modern strategic requirements. Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota's offensive peak is defined by unmatched deep field command from Randy Moss, a receiver whose speed, leaping prowess, and control in contested situations forced defenses to adjust coverage before the snap. His vertical spacing shifted dramatically whenever he was on the field, reshaping how opposing secondaries structured their positioning and overall game planning. The influence he had on the field altered the franchise's passing philosophy in a lasting way. The organization's early offensive foundation at quarterback was built on improvisational control under pressure and creativity outside the pocket, thanks to Fran Tarkenton. Tarkenton was capable of extending plays when structure broke down and creating passing opportunities that most systems could not sustain at the time, adding flexibility during a formative era. Tarkenton's style of play established an early benchmark for adaptability and movement at the position. A modern continuation of Minnesota's receiving tradition is driven by Justin Jefferson's precise route execution and consistent separation against complex coverage schemes. Jefferson's timing, footwork, and reliability have made numbers steady across different defensive looks, quickly positioning this role as a central offensive focus. His presence in the roster carries forward the franchise's history of elite wide receiver impact into the current era. Defensive identity during the franchise's historic peak was anchored by Alan Page's interior disruption that consistently altered offensive timing and backfield rhythm. His penetration through blocking schemes helped define a physically dominant unit that controlled the line of scrimmage. That foundation established Minnesota as a force built on defensive pressure, complemented across generations by evolving offensive talent and quarterback creativity. Detroit Lions. Barry Sanders is a defining offensive figure in Detroit's history. His time with Detroit centered on unmatched agility and balance, where instant direction changes consistently created instability for defenders. Even under heavy defensive attention, Sanders was able to generate explosive gains on a regular basis. Sanders' level of individual dominance produced one of the most visually striking careers in league history. At wide receiver, Calvin Johnson's overwhelming physical presence redefined how passing threats were defended through size, strength, and elite control at the catch point. His contested receptions against double coverage turned into high-impact plays that forced entire defensive schemes to adjust their priorities. His influence on the field elevated the passing identity and changed how defenses approached the position. For the Detroit Lions, long-term quarterback play was marked by strong arm talent and sustained volume passing in high-pressure environments by Matthew Stafford. He offered consistent production across multiple seasons and kept the team competitive despite structural challenges, while later success elsewhere reinforced individual capability. His tenure reflects durability and resilience within a difficult competitive setting. The Detroit Lions' earlier defensive structure was anchored by Joe Schmidt's consistent tackling and leadership at linebacker during the franchise's formative years. Schmidt's physical control and disciplined play helped establish foundational identity on defense. That role emphasized structure and toughness during early development. Together, this group highlights elite individual talent across eras without consistent team-wide championship success. New Orleans Saints. A modern offensive transformation in New Orleans is built around Drew Brees' precision passing and timing-based control, where his accuracy drives sustained scoring efficiency across multiple seasons. Drew Brees' strong coordination within the offensive system allowed long-term consistency, with consistent execution turning drives into reliable output. That approach established a clear standard for the franchise's modern success. Early organizational development was shaped during a difficult competitive period with Archie Manning, where toughness and resilience carried more weight than results. Manning's willingness to compete under pressure in limited support environments helped form the franchise's foundational identity. That era is remembered more for persistence and leadership than for statistical achievement. The New Orleans Saints' defensive credibility in earlier decades was strengthened through consistent pass-rushing pressure from Ricky Jackson, who disrupted opposing quarterbacks and stabilized the Saints' overall performance. Jackson's physical edge play provided balance in periods where defensive effort defined competitiveness. That presence helped establish a reliable defensive identity during formative years. Modern defensive consistency continues through Cameron Jordan's sustained disruption across changing rosters and evolving systems. His longevity and stability at the edge reinforce structure on defense, maintaining a constant threat to opposing offenses. These elements rolled into one reflect offensive evolution that's built on precision, supported by defensive continuity across generations. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Derek Brooks defines the Tampa Bay Buccaneers championship defense that was built around speed, awareness, and control. Early play by Brooks's recognition consistently helped shut down offensive progression before it developed. Brooks's leadership at the center of the unit set the tone for communication and discipline, shaping the identity of the entire defensive structure during the franchise's peak era. The Buccaneers' interior defensive dominance came through constant disruption from Warren Sapp that forced immediate adjustments in offensive protection schemes. Sapp's quick penetration into the backfield created instability for quarterbacks and limited the effectiveness of standard blocking plans. That level of disruption elevated the defense into one of the most dominant units of its time. A later organizational shift introduced elite postseason leadership at quarterback with Tom Brady. He immediately raised the franchise into championship contention. Brady's experience, decision-making, and composure under pressure stabilized the offensive system and increased its efficiency in critical moments. His presence expanded the Buccaneers' competitive ceiling in a short period of time. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers' offensive consistency has been supported by reliable stats across multiple quarterback eras. One quarterback who made his presence felt was Mike Evans. He led the Bucs with strong physicality in contested situations and dependable red zone effectiveness. The cohesion he brought ensured steady output regardless of system changes. Atlanta Falcons. Long-term stability at quarterback is defined by structured leadership by Matt Ryan within complex offensive systems, producing consistent passing output across multiple seasons. The continuity Ryan brought supported repeated playoff appearances and a Super Bowl run, reinforcing a sense of franchise consistency over time. Ryan's tenure is marked by durability, control, and sustained execution. Julio Jones' dominance at wide receiver defines the Falcons' peak at offense. His elite athletic control, combined with precise route execution that consistently creates separation, helped separate Falcons' offense from the rest of the league. Defensive schemes were frequently forced into double coverage, reshaping how passing attacks were structured around him. That impact helped establish the core identity of the passing game during its peak years. Defensive impact and special teams disruption came through elite athletics from Deion Sanders, who affected multiple phases of play. His shutdown coverage capability limited entire sections of the field, while his return talent created sudden momentum shifts that altered game flow. That versatility made the presence influential beyond a single role on defense. A shift at quarterback introduced a new dimension with Michael Vick that's built on speed, improvisation, and off-structure playmaking. Vick's rushing skills and unpredictability forced defenses to abandon traditional containment schemes and adjust their entire approach. That style produced explosive outcomes outside conventional offensive design. This group of Fout reflects offensive explosiveness paired with rare, game-altering defensive and special teams impact. Carolina Panthers. The Panthers' defensive foundation is built on elite recognition and control brought by Luke Kuechly. His early diagnosis of offensive intent allowed plays to be disrupted before they fully developed. The level of awareness he brought drove consistent efficiency across the entire unit, with his leadership helping organize structure and communication on every snap. It reflects dominance rooted in intelligence and anticipation rather than pure reaction. The Panthers' offensive peak performance is defined by Cam Newton, a quarterback who brought a dual-threat style that blends passing strength with physical rushing ability, creating constant matchup problems for defenses. That combination forces structural adjustments and expands the range of offensive possibilities on every drive. A season marked by MVP-level production and a Super Bowl appearance highlights the impact of Cam Newton on the franchise's competitive ceiling. Steve Smith Sr. brings toughness and competitive edge to the receiving position. His prowess to win contested catches despite size limitations created consistent production. His emotional leadership influenced team identity across multiple seasons. He remained a constant offensive threat. Julius Peppers adds defensive versatility through pass rushing strength and athletic range. He was able to pressure quarterbacks from multiple alignments and strengthened defensive schemes. He provided long-term steadiness on the defensive front. This group reflects physicality, intelligence, and explosive offensive capability. Arizona Cardinals. A model of wide receiver consistency is built on precision route running and sustained production across changing quarterbacks. That is exactly what Larry Fitzgerald offered for the Arizona Cardinals. His reliability over a long career creates offensive structure even when surrounding systems shift. That level of durability establishes a benchmark for dependability at the position. Kurt Warner provides peak offensive success through efficient passing and leadership. His quick processing elevated the team into championship contention. He guided the offense during its strongest modern postseason run. His impact is concentrated but significant. Patrick Peterson adds defensive and special teams versatility through coverage skill and athletic returns. He was able to match elite receivers' strengthened defensive matchups. He provided consistent playmaking across multiple roles. His presence elevated overall team flexibility. Larry Wilson anchors early defensive identity through aggressive ball-hawking ability. His impact helped establish foundational defensive credibility. He set early standards for turnover creation and defensive intensity. This group reflects evolution from early struggles to modern offensive and defensive balance. Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers' defining offensive peak is built on unmatched scoring output by LaDainian Tomlinson. Tomlinson's vision and acceleration made even small openings turn into explosive gains in both rushing and receiving phases, making him a rare find in the league. He offered a level of production that reached historic heights in a single season, standing among the most productive campaigns ever recorded by a running back, and setting a clear benchmark for franchise dominance. Dan Fouts helped shape the Chargers' earlier offensive identity through his high-volume passing within a system built to attack vertically and stretch defenses across the field. Fouts' quick-release mechanics and constant deep-shot aggression transformed the structure of the offense, establishing the franchise as a major passing force and influencing its offensive reputation for years. Junior Seau helped define the Chargers' defense. With him on the field, the Chargers were relentless, had a sideline-to-sideline range, and had consistent, high-impact playmaking across multiple seasons. His energy and intensity elevated the entire unit, setting a competitive standard that carried through different eras. That presence became the emotional center of the franchise's defensive identity. Justin Herbert introduces the modern era through arm strength, accuracy, and composure under pressure. He was able to execute difficult throws in tight coverage, gives the offense long-term cohesion. He symbolizes the current direction of the franchise at quarterback. Denver Broncos. A historical identity is built on a quarterback profile defined by John Elway. Elway had arm strength, mobility, and the prowess to execute under postseason pressure. His late-game drive extension in critical moments helped shape the franchise's early championship reputation, while his sustained leadership across multiple deep playoff runs established the foundation of long-term success. A later offensive era is defined by Peyton Manning precision-based control and pre-snap command that elevated passing efficiency to elite levels. His defensive recognition before the snap allowed for structured execution that consistently produced record-breaking offensive output. Peyton Manning's approach delivered a championship that reinforced the franchise's strong quarterback tradition. Rushing dominance during the franchise's peak championship stretch is defined by Terrell Davis's efficiency and elite postseason performance. Davis's consistent stats in high-stakes games placed the ground attack of Broncos at the center of title success, with peak seasons standing among the most efficient rushing stretches in league history. That balance strengthened the overall offensive structure. The Broncos' defensive impact is driven by relentless pass-rushing pressure by Von Miller that consistently alters game momentum in critical moments. His disruption at the quarterback level has produced defining postseason performances, including a championship MVP-level impact. Las Vegas Raiders. Jim Otto represents the foundation of the Las Vegas Raiders' toughness. His unmatched durability and control at center, where consistency sets the tone for offensive line identity, was constant. His continuity in that role helped establish early franchise structure during formative years and reflected a standard built on physical resilience and discipline. Quarterback leadership during the championship era is defined by Ken Stabler's calm decision-making and reliable execution in high-pressure situations. The success he had in critical moments shaped postseason outcomes and aligned with a gritty competitive culture that emphasized composure under pressure. That presence remains central to the franchise's historical identity. Offensive versatility expanded through Marcus Allen's backfield presence. He was able to contribute for the Raiders as both a rusher and receiver. His multi-phase numbers created dynamic threats that increased overall offensive flexibility within the system. Marcus Allen's strong postseason performances reinforced the impact of that adaptability on winning success. The Raiders' defensive identity is anchored by Howie Long's consistent pass-rushing strength and disruptive physical presence that set the tone for aggressive play. Howie Long's influence helped define one of the franchise's most dominant defensive stretches. Indianapolis Colts. Peyton Manning defines the modern Colts era through precision passing and unmatched control of offensive structure. His pre-snap adjustments and timing-based execution transformed Indianapolis into an elite offensive unit. He delivered sustained regular season dominance and a championship run. He remains the central figure of franchise success. Johnny Unitas anchors the historical quarterback foundation through leadership and late-game execution. His knack to drive offenses under pressure established early organizational identity. He set the standard for quarterback professionalism in the franchise's early years. His legacy continues to influence Colts history. Marvin Harrison provides receiving excellence through precise route execution and consistent separation. His chemistry with Manning created one of the most efficient passing combinations in league history. He delivered reliability across multiple offensive systems. His presence defined timing-based offense. Reggie Wayne extends that receiving tradition through durability and postseason output. His high-level output ensured continuity in the passing game. He supported long-term offensive stability across quarterback transitions. This group reflects elite quarterback play, supported by precise and consistent receiving talent. Houston Texans. J.J. Watt defines the Texans' defensive identity through disruption, leadership, and backfield penetration. His sacks and defensive scores made him the franchise's most impactful player. He elevated team competitiveness during early years. He remains the central figure in franchise history. Andre Johnson anchors offensive output through consistent receiving output and physical route execution. His was able to perform in difficult team environments, making him a reliable offensive cornerstone. He delivered elite numbers across multiple seasons. He represents foundational offensive stability. C.J. Stroud introduces modern quarterback direction through accuracy, composure, and decision-making under pressure. His early performances signal long-term offensive potential for the franchise. He represents a shift toward structured competitiveness. His presence defines the future outlook. Arian Foster adds offensive balance through vision-based rushing and patience in finding running lanes. He consistently provided structure to the ground game through his impact. He supported offensive versatility during key seasons. Tennessee Titans. Earl Campbell defines early franchise identity through physical rushing edge and relentless power running. His style created constant pressure on defenses through contact-heavy gains. He set the tone for a run-focused organizational philosophy. He remains a foundational figure. Warren Moon represents passing excellence through leadership and structured offensive execution. By operating within a professional passing system, he elevated the franchise's competitiveness, establishing early quarterback credibility for the organization. His influence shaped offensive evolution. Steve McNair continues that quarterback tradition through toughness and improvisational playmaking. By extending plays under pressure, he defined a successful era for the franchise by delivering strong postseason performances during his tenure. He reinforced resilience at quarterback. Derrick Henry represents modern rushing superiority through size, speed, and workload durability. His efficiency has defined recent offensive strategy for the Tennessee Titans. Throughout his tenure, he was able to control games through rushing volume sets him apart. Jacksonville Jaguars. The franchise's foundation is built around Tony Boselli, whose elite pass protection and control at the line of scrimmage created early structural stability. He was able to neutralize defensive pressure, allowing the offense to function with consistency, setting a lasting standard for line play. That presence remains one of the most respected pillars in team history. Early offensive identity takes shape through Fred Taylor, whose balance, vision, and steady yardage efficiency provided reliability during formative years. Explosive runs paired with consistent output gave the offense stability and direction. His performance established the benchmark for running back play within the organization. A later phase in the backfield is defined by Maurice Jones-Drew, whose compact power and agility supported high-volume rushing numbers across multiple seasons. Handling heavy workloads in difficult offensive environments highlighted durability and resilience. His role positioned him as the central force of the offense during that stretch. The modern direction shifts toward Trevor Lawrence, whose arm talent and leadership potential signal a focus on long-term competitiveness. Continued development at quarterback provides the framework for future stability and growth. Together, this group reflects progression from foundational line strength to sustained rushing production and into emerging quarterback-led structure. Washington Commanders. Washington's early foundation is shaped by Sammy Baugh, whose pioneering quarterback play helped establish the framework for forward passing in the league's formative years. His rare prowess to contribute as a passer, punter, and overall field leader made him uniquely valuable in an era without specialized roles. That influence set early structural standards for quarterback performance and extended far beyond his playing years. Long-term defensive stability is represented by Darrell Green, whose elite speed and unmatched longevity provided rare consistency in the secondary. Maintaining high-level coverage across multiple decades required discipline, recovery knack, and sustained focus against evolving offensive systems. His career reflects endurance and dependable performance at a premium defensive position. The receiving identity is anchored by Art Monk, whose disciplined route execution and reliable offensive output made him central to offensive structure. Consistency in key situations, particularly in sustaining drives, allowed the passing game to function smoothly, regardless of changes at quarterback. That presence established a lasting model of dependability within the franchise. Modern defensive direction is reflected through Chase Young, whose explosiveness off the edge and disruptive traits signal an effort to rebuild a dominant front. Consistent pressure on opposing quarterbacks introduces a renewed emphasis on defensive impact. Together, this group connects early innovation, sustained excellence, and a modern push toward defensive resurgence. Cleveland Browns. Cleveland's historic identity is built around Jim Brown, whose unmatched rushing power and rare athletic command set a standard that still shapes how running backs are evaluated. A blend of speed and strength allowed him to overwhelm defenses on a consistent basis, producing a level of impact few have matched. His career stands as a benchmark for individual command in league history. The franchise's early championship success is anchored by Otto Graham, whose efficient quarterback play and leadership drove sustained winning runs. Control of offensive rhythm allowed the team to operate with precision, establishing Cleveland as an early professional powerhouse. That era reflects foundational success built on consistency and execution. Modern stability along the offensive line is defined by Joe Thomas, whose technical precision and long-term durability created a reliable presence at tackle. Consistent pass protection at an elite level persisted even during challenging team stretches, reinforcing the value of structural dependability. His performance set a standard for reliability in his era. The current defensive identity is shaped by Myles Garrett, whose explosive pass-rushing prowess and athletic disruption generate constant pressure in the backfield. A combination of speed and power forces offenses to adjust protection schemes and timing. Together, this group reflects a blend of historic dominance and modern individual excellence across different eras. Cincinnati Bengals. The foundation of Cincinnati's history is built around Anthony Munoz, whose elite technique, balance, and strength set the standard for offensive line play. Consistent protection across multiple systems created long-term stability, allowing the offense to function at a high level regardless of surrounding changes. His presence remains the benchmark for excellence within the franchise. A modern shift at quarterback is defined by Joe Burrow, whose accuracy, timing, and composure under pressure have driven the team into championship contention. Rapid development into a high-level passer brought structure and leadership to the offense, establishing a clear direction for the current era. Offensive creativity and personality are reflected through Chad Johnson, whose precise route running and dynamic playmaking generated consistent separation and explosive gains. His impact and flair helped shape the passing identity, adding a distinct edge to the offense during his tenure. Defensive strength in the interior is anchored by Geno Atkins, who was able to penetrate blocking schemes and collapse pockets, created constant disruption. Consistent pressure from the inside reinforced stability across different defensive systems. Together, this group highlights offensive evolution supported by elite trench play and strong interior defense. New York Jets. The franchise's defining peak is centered around Joe Namath, whose leadership and performance in a historic Super Bowl III upset created one of the most iconic moments in football. Confidence and execution under pressure elevated expectations for underdog teams across the league, leaving a legacy built on impact rather than longevity. Long-term offensive stability is represented by Curtis Martin, whose patient running style and durability sustained offensive output across multiple seasons. Consistency from early to late career provided the team with a reliable foundation in the backfield, reinforcing dependability at the position. Modern defensive identity is anchored by Darrelle Revis, whose elite coverage allowed him to erase top receiving threats from opposing game plans. His control of play in isolation redefined how cornerback impact is measured, giving the defense a level of control rarely sustained at that position. Early offensive success is tied to Don Maynard, whose vertical speed and deep threat skills stretched defenses and supported developing passing systems. His contributions played a key role in the franchise's AFL-era competitiveness. Together, this group reflects iconic moments, defensive excellence, and steady offensive production across different eras. Adrian Peterson, 296 rushing yards. Adrian Peterson put together a game against the San Diego Chargers that still reads like an exaggeration. 30 attempts turned into 296 yards and 3 scores, a total that led the day and rewrote the record books. At that moment, it stood as the highest single-setting rushing stats ever recorded in the NFL. Even more jarring is the timing. This came in just his 8th professional appearance, long before most runners settle into rhythm or recognition. There was no extended buildup, no gradual rise, just immediate dominance that forced attention. The afternoon didn't creep toward something historic. It exploded into it. Early on, he broke free for a 64-yard score, setting the tone almost instantly. From there, nothing meaningfully changed on the defensive side. Standard positioning failed repeatedly, and pursuit angles looked off as plays stretched beyond expectation. What made the display so difficult to contain wasn't a single trait. It was the fusion of burst and power. He hit openings before they fully developed, and once he reached open space, separation happened faster than defenders could react. The usual defensive discipline simply couldn't stabilize the situation. As the workload increased, the impact refused to level off. Typically, settings like this rely on one massive breakaway to inflate totals. But that wasn't the case here. Yes, there were long scoring runs, 73, 64, and 40 yards. But what made the yardage overwhelming was everything in between. There was no quiet stretch where things normalized. Every possession carried the same threat level, which is rare in a league built on adjustments and corrections. By the fourth quarter, the objective had shifted. It was no longer about stopping anything outright. It was about damage control. The Minnesota Vikings didn't operate with a dominant aerial attack, forcing spacing advantages. The approach leaned heavily toward the ground, meaning the opposition knew exactly what was coming. Even with that clarity, containment never materialized. There was no deception involved, just repeated execution against a prepared opponent, with the same ending every time. Norm Van Brocklin, 554 passing yards. Norm Van Brocklin produced a number on September 28, 1951, that still hasn't been touched. 554 yards through the air in a single matchup against the New York Yanks. Decades later, with modern rules favoring offense and schemes built to stretch coverage, that total remains at the top. It feels disconnected from reality because of the number itself, but because later eras designed to boost passing yardage still haven't pushed beyond it. The matchup didn't unfold through slow accumulation. It turned into repeated vertical strikes that stretched coverage constantly. The Los Angeles Rams leaned into a deep passing approach that created immediate gains rather than extended drives. Instead of working methodically down the field, possessions flipped instantly with long completions. Defensive alignment at the time couldn't hold up against that kind of spacing, and once momentum started building, there was no consistent response that slowed it. Only 27 completions were needed to reach that total, meaning each successful throw carried significant distance. This wasn't built on volume alone. It relied on sustained downfield success. Receivers consistently found space, coverage broke apart, and every connection reinforced the same pattern rather than correcting it. Another layer comes from how the flow of the contest allowed it to continue. In most situations, once control is established, the approach shifts toward managing the clock. That didn't happen here. The same aggressive mindset stayed in place, allowing outcomes to keep rising without interruption. In an era that should have limited passing totals, everything aligned to create a number that still stands apart. Derek Thomas, 7 sacks in one game, loss. Derek Thomas delivered a defensive showing in 1990 that should have dictated everything. 7 sacks in a single afternoon against the Seattle Seahawks. It feels disconnected from reality because later eras designed to boost passing yardage still haven't pushed beyond it. From the opening moments, pressure didn't just exist, it consistently turned into finished plays. 1 sack requires timing and execution. Multiple usually signal offensive breakdown. Reaching 7 means every adjustment failed. Quarterback Dave Krieg kept facing the same situation, with Thomas breaking through protection from different alignments and closing space before any recovery could happen. What stands out is how repetitive the final sequence remained. Offenses typically respond by making changes to their protection, calling quicker throws, or shifting the pocket. None of those changes altered what was happening. Thomas attacked from different angles, showing versatility instead of relying on one mismatch. That removed any chance for stabilization and kept the pressure constant. Late in the contest, everything flipped. After dealing with constant disruption, Seattle still found a moment that changed the outcome. a deep touchdown that erased what should have been a controlled finish. That contrast is what defines this showing. A defensive effort that should have sealed everything instead became part of a loss. Tim Tebow, 316 yards on 10 completions. During a wild card matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers on January 8, 2012, Tim Tebow produced a stat line that doesn't follow normal passing structure. 10 completions turned into 316 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's over 31 yards per completion, a number that breaks the usual relationship between volume and outcome. From the first drive, the pattern was clear. This wasn't a methodical passing approach built on rhythm. Each successful throw created massive field position swings. Pittsburgh's defense, known for discipline, struggled to cope to the timing and spacing of those deep connections. When Tebow connected, it wasn't incremental progress, it was immediate impact. The contrast between limited completions and extreme yardage is what drives how unusual this is. Fewer completions typically restrict total impact. That's how the structure of football works. Here, that relationship completely broke down. Every successful attempt carried disproportionate value, allowing production to spike without needing volume. The defining moment came in overtime. On the very first play, Tebow delivered an 80-yard touchdown to Demaryius Thomas, ending everything instantly. One play decided the entire setting, reinforcing how different this numbers was from conventional quarterback showing. Antonio Cromartie, 109-yard missed field goal return. Antonio Cromartie produced a return during a matchup between the San Diego Chargers and the Minnesota Vikings in 2007 that reached the absolute limit of what's possible. A missed 59-yard field goal turned into a 109-yard touchdown, the longest conversions play in league history. The sequence began as a long field goal attempt near halftime. Instead of ending the possession, the kick fell short and stayed in play. Cromartie caught it deep in the end zone, right at the back line. In that moment, the situation shifted from a failed conversion attempt into an open field opportunity. What followed required more than straight-line speed. Navigating through pursuit meant reading blocks, changing direction, and maintaining balance across the entire field. Every yard increased the difficulty because defenders were already moving at speed. Despite that, Cromartie consistently found space and extended the return further than expected. Starting at maximum depth removes any margin for error. Every variable had to align perfectly, from kick placement to coverage gaps to execution. Since 109 yards represents the upper limit under standard field dimensions, this isn't just difficult to surpass, it cannot be exceeded. Jamal Lewis, 295 rushing yards. During the 2003 season, Jamal Lewis produced a total that pushed the limits of what a single running back could generate. 30 carries, 295 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Cleveland Browns. At the time, that number set the single-setting rushing record and established a benchmark that felt nearly unreachable. From the opening drive, the tone was clear. Lewis wasn't just finding space, he was gaining significant yardage before defenders could establish contact. The Baltimore Ravens created initial movement, but what stood out was what happened after that first level. Once he broke through, his combination of size and acceleration made recovery extremely difficult. As the workload increased, the outcome didn't drop. Normally, efficiency declines as carries rise. Defenses responded, fatigue builds, and gains become smaller. That pattern didn't apply here. The more touches he received, the more the defense seemed to wear down, creating larger lanes as the contest progressed. While there were explosive runs, including an 82-yard touchdown, the yardage didn't depend on one moment. It built through repeated success across multiple drives. High workload and extreme efficiency rarely exist together at this level, which is why this stands out. Nick Foles, 7 touchdowns, perfect efficiency. On 2013, Nick Foles had an afternoon that feels closer to a controlled simulation than an actual NFL outing. 22 completions, 406 yards, 7 touchdown passes, no interceptions, and a perfect passer rating against the Oakland Raiders. Each part of that line is rare on its own. Combining all of it into a single afternoon creates something that almost never occurs. From early in the contest, there was no visible disruption to his rhythm. He wasn't constantly forced into tight window throws, but that doesn't reduce the impact. Every favorable situation turned into points. Possessions didn't stall or shift direction. They consistently ended the same way, with the ball in the end zone. That level of conversion without interruption is what set the tone. High yardage often comes with mistakes. Multiple conversion throws usually involve risk. This had neither. Decision-making remained sharp. Accuracy never dipped, and protection held long enough for plays to develop exactly as designed. Every layer functioned without breakdown, which is extremely rare over a full setting. Another factor is how quickly the box score built. By halftime, multiple touchdowns were already on the board, and the outcome had largely shifted out of reach. Even then, the execution didn't drop. There was no shift toward conservative play. The same level of precision continued, allowing the total to reach a point that few quarterbacks have ever matched. Clinton Portis, 5 rushing touchdowns. December 7th, 2003, turned into a showcase of total control on the ground. Clinton Portis piled up 218 rushing yards and reached the end zone 5 separate times against the Kansas City Chiefs, counts that should be enough to decide any setting outright. That level of end zone production alone is extreme, but the real difference is how consistently the same ending repeated every time his offense reached range. From the beginning, the Denver Broncos leaned heavily on their ground attack. The scheme emphasized timing, spacing, and disciplined blocking, and Portis operated perfectly within that setup. He didn't need to create everything independently, but once lanes opened, his acceleration carried him into the second level before defenders could reset. 5 rushing scores are unusual because maintaining that level of involvement near the goal line is extremely difficult. Typically, end zone result chances are spread across multiple options or disrupted by shifts. Here, that pattern never changed. When Denver approached the end zone, the ball went to Portis, and the game remained identical. The contest itself continued to escalate, which prevented any slowdown. Instead of shifting into clock control after gaining an advantage, the offense had to keep producing. That created additional chances, and each one followed the same pattern. There wasn't a single defining moment. It was the accumulation of identical results in the most critical areas of the field. Justin Tucker, 66-yard game-winning field goal. A finish like this pushed the limits of what a field goal attempt is supposed to look like. As the clock expired, Justin Tucker connected from 66 yards out, sealing the win over the Detroit Lions. That distance alone places it beyond what is typically considered realistic in a live situation. The sequence leading up to the kick already carried tension. The Baltimore Ravens had to move into position quickly, and even after doing so, the attempt remained extreme. Most teams would approach that scenario differently, either aiming for a shorter gain or preparing for an alternate outcome. Instead, everything rested on one attempt from well outside standard range. The execution added another layer. The ball traveled the full distance, struck the crossbar, and bounced through. That detail matters because it shows how narrow the margin was. This wasn't a clean clearance. It required just enough height and distance, combined with a favorable bounce, to succeed. From a technical standpoint, attempts beyond 60 yards are already rare, and success rates drop sharply as distance increases. Extending that to 66 yards places it in territory where even elite kickers face extremely low probability. Every element from snap to hold to contact had to align perfectly for the outcome to hold. Corey Dillon, 278 rushing yards. Corey Dillon's outing on October 22, 2000 came from a setting where almost nothing hinted at what was about to unfold. Dillon delivered an outing that quickly turned into something historic. 278 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against the Denver Broncos, setting a rookie single rushing record at the time. What stands out immediately is the context. The Cincinnati Bengals were not operating from a position of dominance, and the offense lacked consistency overall. That means Dillon's numbers didn't come from ideal conditions. It came from repeated execution within a setup that wasn't controlling other areas. He showed a level of physical control that changed how defenders approached each carry. He combined power with enough burst to turn moderate openings into extended gains. Initial contact didn't end plays. It often pushed the run further downfield, allowing yardage to build steadily. While there were explosive moments, including a long touchdown, the total wasn't built on one breakaway. It accumulated through consistent success across multiple drives. Even as realignments came, he continued finding space, showing that the display wasn't tied to a single weakness. Michael Vick, perfect passing, explosive control. During a Monday Night Football matchup against the Washington Redskins on November 15, 2010, Michael Vick produced yardage that combined efficiency, explosiveness, and control in a way that rarely aligns. 333 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a high passer rating, along with major impact as a runner. The pace shifted immediately. This wasn't a gradual buildup. Vick created momentum instantly through deep completions that stretched coverage and forced realignments. The defense had to account for multiple threats at once, and that pressure opened space across the field. Some rating display rely on short, controlled passing. Others depend on explosive plays. This included both. Accurate short throws, extended plays, and deep connections all worked together, making it difficult for the defense to settle. Another key factor was mobility. Even when he didn't carry the ball, the threat influenced every defensive decision. That hesitation created additional space, which translated into easier opportunities through the air. The finish was a showing where multiple high-difficulty elements aligned without any visible drop in execution. Calvin Johnson, 329 receiving yards in a loss. Calvin Johnson produced the kind of receiving total on October 27, 2013, that should have taken over an entire setting from start to finish. 14 catches, 329 yards, and a touchdown is a huge day for a receiver, and it stands as the highest single-game receiving yardage total in NFL history. That alone would make it unforgettable, but the closing moment is what pushes it into absurd territory. The Detroit Lions still lost to the Dallas Cowboys, which creates a contradiction that makes the production feel even stranger. A player can dominate a defense this thoroughly, pile up a record that no one has topped, and still walk away without the win. Johnson was clearly the centerpiece of everything Detroit wanted to do, and Dallas never found a lasting answer. They changed coverages, rolled help in his direction, and tried to crowd throwing windows, but none of those responses held up for long. He was not producing in only one way either. This included deep balls, jump balls, and short catches turning into run-after-catch gains. He won across the field, on different route depths, and in different coverage situations, which is exactly why the defense could not isolate one issue and fix it. Every time Dallas appeared ready to slow him down, the same problem surfaced again in a different form. 329 yards is difficult to grasp because it requires sustained success over the course of the game. A receiver does not get there off one miracle catch or one broken coverage. It takes repeated completions, continued trust from the quarterback, and enough offensive rhythm for the volume to keep building. Johnson did not inflate the total with one isolated burst and then disappear. The outcome kept coming in waves, drive after drive, which is what made the showing feel so overwhelming. He kept moving the chains, flipping field position, and giving Detroit exactly the kind of offensive edge that normally decides a contest. That is why the ending carries so much weight. With Johnson doing this much damage, the expected script says Detroit should control the outcome. Instead, Dallas stayed in range, answered with offense of its own, and then took the game in the closing moments. That final turn changes how the outcome is remembered. Rather than sitting cleanly inside a victory, it stands as one of the clearest examples that even extreme individual production does not always guarantee the result. Johnson set a record that still stands, and somehow it still was not enough. Marcus Mariota, a touchdown pass to himself. In a postseason setting in 2018, Marcus Mariota was at the center of one of the rarest point sequences the league has ever seen. During a wild-card matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, he threw a touchdown pass to himself. Just saying that sounds wrong, because quarterbacks are supposed to deliver the pass, not finish the catch. Yet, by rule, the sequence counted exactly that way. Mariota received credit for both the completion and the touchdown reception, which instantly placed the play into that tiny category of moments that feel almost too strange to belong in a playoff game. The setup made it even more unusual because the Titans were not operating in a low-pressure situation where a weird bounce could be dismissed as a random highlight. Tennessee was trailing, the offense needed points, and the throw went toward the end zone with the entire possession carrying real weight. Mariota released the ball, a defender got a hand on it, and in most cases, that is where the play dies, as either an incompletion or a turnover threat. Instead, the deflection sent the ball back toward the quarterback. Mariota stayed aware, tracked it immediately, secured the catch, and finished the play himself. That balance between chaos and awareness is a huge part of why the display stands out. Yes, the deflection introduced randomness, but the touchdown still required Mariota to react faster than everyone else around him. He had to recognize that the pass was still alive, adapt to the altered path, catch the ball cleanly, and move into the end zone before the defense recovered. Without that instant recognition, the sequence ends as a failed attempt. The strangeness of the play can distract the fact that it still demanded presence of mind in a critical moment. The broader game context is what cements it. The Titans completed the comeback, which gave the play real postseason weight instead of leaving it as a meaningless curiosity. That matters because unusual production gain more force when they directly shape the closing moment. Mariota throwing a touchdown to himself is already one of the oddest entries you will find in NFL history. Cordarrelle Patterson, multiple 100-plus yard returns. Cordarrelle Patterson belongs on any list of absurd NFL stat lines because his case is not tied to one impossible afternoon. It is built on the repeated appearance of a play that is already rare even once. Patterson recorded multiple kickoff return touchdowns of 100 yards or more, and eventually set the league record in that category. Most return men spend entire careers without ever taking one the full distance from that deep. Patterson kept doing it across different seasons, different coaching staffs, and different teams, which turned something that usually looks like a fluke into a repeating pattern. A return of that length requires almost every variable to cooperate. The kick has to land deep enough to force a true run back. The blocking unit has to create early space without drawing a penalty that erases the whole play. The returner then has to read pursuit angles instantly, choose the correct lane, get to full speed in almost no time, and still maintain balance through traffic before reaching the final wave of defenders. Usually, one small mistake ends the run around the 30, the 40, or midfield. Patterson kept clearing the entire field, which tells you this was more than random chaos. A lot of elite return specialists are smaller players built around quick cuts and sudden direction changes. Patterson had a bigger frame, which made him dangerous in a different way. He could absorb poor tackling attempts, keep momentum after contact, and still reach open field speed fast enough to erase pursuit angles. That combination changed how opponents had to approach him. He was elusive in space, was physically difficult to stop once the return gained shape, which made every mistake in coverage more costly. There is also a larger historical point that makes the record stronger. Patterson built this return resume during an era when kickoff opportunities were gradually shrinking. More touchbacks reduced chances. Coverage units became more specialized. Teams often preferred caution, choosing to avoid giving a dangerous returner any opening at all. Despite that environment, he still kept producing. That is why the total feels so outrageous. It is not one highlight. It is repeated dominance in a phase of football where repeated dominance is extremely hard to sustain. Jerome Harrison, 286 rushing yards out of nowhere. Jerome Harrison delivered one of the strangest rushing explosions the NFL has ever seen. Against the Kansas City Chiefs, he ran for 286 yards and 3 touchdowns, a total that places the showing among the greatest single contest rushing yardage in league history. The number itself is massive, but the real reason it feels so unusual is who produced it. Harrison was not entering that afternoon with the kind of league-wide reputation that normally makes people think a record-level display is coming. The performance also did not rely on a single early breakaway that immediately told everyone history might be forming. It grew over time through repeated chunks of yardage that kept increasing pressure on the defense. As the contest moved forward, Kansas City kept losing control of gap discipline and tackling angles, while Cleveland kept finding more confidence in the ground attack. Harrison's running style played a huge part in that. He was decisive, he identified creases quickly, and once he committed, he accelerated through them without hesitation. That kind of timing matters, because huge rushing totals are not only about raw speed. They depend on vision, discipline, and the ability to maximize space before it closes. Another major reason this production stands out is the workload. Harrison carried the ball 34 times, which means this was not some low-volume outlier inflated by 2 miracle runs and a handful of extra touches. He handled a heavy load and still maintained extraordinary efficiency. That is one of the hardest combinations to sustain in football. As carries rise, averages usually fall. Defenders counter, contact wears on the body, and the clean lanes start to shrink. None of that changed the outcome enough here. The historical placement gives the performance even more weight. Harrison finished just short of the all-time rushing record, which means his name sits alongside some of the biggest single matchup rushing totals ever recorded. That alone feels surprising, because fans usually expect those spots to belong to the biggest legendary names. Harrison's matchup breaks that expectation completely. It is one of the clearest examples that under the right conditions, a player outside the usual historic spotlight can suddenly produce something that looks almost impossible. Tony Romo, 506 passing yards and 5 touchdowns, still a loss. Tony Romo produced the kind of quarterback stats that should almost automatically lock down a victory. On October 6, 2013, he threw for 506 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception against the Denver Broncos. In most situations, that is enough to win and enough to define the entire week around the league. Yet Dallas still lost, which is what gives the numbers its absurd shape. A 500-yard, 5-touchdown outing is supposed to be decisive. Instead, it became the offensive centerpiece of a loss in one of the wildest shootouts the league has seen. The game moved at a pace that barely allowed for error. Both offenses kept delivering in the end zone, defensive resistance kept fading, and the normal balance of football disappeared. In that kind of environment, the quarterback has to keep answering because every possession matters more than usual. Romo did exactly that. His production was not empty accumulation, gathered after the outcome had already tilted away. He was matching the pace of the matchup in real time, which is a major reason the performance holds so much weight. Dallas stayed alive because he kept delivering. The yardage itself came in a variety of ways, which makes the total even more impressive. This wasn't a stream of short throws quietly building output. Romo hit deeper routes, worked intermediate windows, and kept the offense moving at speed across different parts of the field. The 5 touchdown passes mattered just as much as the 506 yards because they show that the impact translated directly into points. This was high-volume impact, which is why it should have been enough to take control of the afternoon. What changed everything was the environment around the production and the timing of the one mistake that remained. Because Denver kept producing at the same pace, there was no margin for error left by the end. One late interception shifted the final sequence and reframed the entire showing. Instead of being remembered only as one of the greatest quarterback contests ever, it became an example of how even extreme yardage can fail to secure the win when everything turns into a full-scale offensive race. Nick Chubb, 3 touchdowns on 3 carries. On October 2018, Nick Chubb registered 3 carries turned into 105 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Oakland Raiders. That means every single touch ended in the end zone. Not a first down, not a moderate gain, but the maximum possible outcome each time he handled the ball. In a sport built on variability, that level of consistency feels almost impossible. Chubb wasn't handling a full workload or building rhythm through repeated touches. He only had 3 rushing attempts. In most cases, that kind of usage barely registers statistically. Here, it created one of the most extreme efficiency profiles ever recorded. The imbalance between opportunity and returns is what immediately sets this apart from traditional standout performances. Each run reached the same ending, but the way they developed still required execution. Long touchdowns depend on initial blocking, quick recognition of running lanes, and the ability to capitalize once space opens. Chubb showed strong vision, identifying openings almost instantly, and once he reached open field, his acceleration created separation that defenders couldn't recover from. The combination of awareness and speed turned every carry into points on the board. The most striking part is the lack of interruption. Even elite runners experience negative plays, short gains, or stalled attempts. Defensive positioning, missed blocks, or simple randomness usually disrupt perfect results. None of that applied here. Every carry reached the end zone, removing the unpredictability that normally defines rushing attempts. Devin Hester, opening kickoff touchdown in the Super Bowl. Devin Hester produced a moment that immediately broke the expected rhythm of a championship setting back on February 4th, 2007. Facing the Indianapolis Colts in Super Bowl 41, the Chicago Bears received the opening kickoff. Before either offense ran a play, Hester returned it 92 yards for a touchdown. That alone is rare. Doing it on the very first play of the Super Bowl makes it even more difficult to process. Kickoff returns for touchdowns are already uncommon because coverage units are designed specifically to prevent them. In a Super Bowl setting, preparation reaches its highest level. Teams emphasize lane discipline, tackling fundamentals, and positional awareness because one mistake can define the outcome. Despite all of that, the first sequence turned into a score. The structure of the return highlights how precise everything had to be. The kick landed in a returnable area, introducing risk. The blocking unit created just enough space without losing shape. Hester read the initial lanes, moved through the first wave, and once he reached open field, the play shifted into a race defined by speed and angles. At that point, separation became inevitable. Instead of a gradual opening where teams settle in, Chicago took an instant lead. That forced Indianapolis to counter immediately. Even though the Colts eventually won, the return remains the only opening kickoff touchdown in Super Bowl history, which reinforces how rare it is for something like this to happen under maximum pressure. Doug Martin, 251 yards and 4 touchdowns. Doug Martin's rushing performance on November 4th, 2012, sits among the highest single totals ever recorded. Against the Oakland Raiders, he finished with 25 carries, 251 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That total alone places the contest near the top historically. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers established the run as a central focus, and Martin responded immediately. He showed strong vision, identifying lanes quickly, and once he reached the second level, his acceleration allowed him to extend plays beyond their initial design. That combination created consistent gains that kept building across multiple drives. The balance between explosive moments and sustained count sets this display apart. There were long offensive runs, including an 87-yard touchdown, but the total wasn't dependent on a single breakaway. Outcomes continued across multiple series, which prevented the defense from stabilizing or resetting. Another key factor is how the defense responded. As the yardage increased, changes came in the form of stacked fronts and added support near the line. Even with those changes, Martin kept finding space. That shows the advantage wasn't tied to one breakdown. It existed across different looks, which is why the results stayed high from start to finish. Patrick Mahomes, 5,097 yards and 50 touchdowns in first season as starter. In 2018, Patrick Mahomes produced a season that usually takes years to approach. In his first full year as the starter for the Kansas City Chiefs, he threw for 5,097 yards and 50 touchdowns. That combination is rare on its own. Doing it immediately, without a long buildup, makes it stand out. The offense operated at a pace that forced defenses into constant reaction. Mahomes didn't rely on one type of throw. Yardage came from deep passes, intermediate routes, and plays extended beyond their original design. That variety made it difficult for defenses to settle into a consistent plan. Passing for over 5,000 yards is already uncommon. Pairing that with 50 touchdowns means the production consistently turned into points rather than just field position. Drives didn't stall near the goal line, they finished. Another important layer is how the output held even as defenses altered their approach. As the season progressed, opponents increased pressure and altered coverage. Despite that, Mahomes continued producing through timing, improvisation, and off-script creation. That ability to sustain impact after recalibrations makes this more than a strong showing, but a historic impact. Ryan Fitzpatrick, 6 touchdowns and still lost. Ryan Fitzpatrick's performance on September 16, 2018 should have controlled everything. 402 yards and 6 touchdown passes against the Pittsburgh Steelers. In most situations, that guarantees a win. Instead, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers still lost. The pace pushed both offenses into constant goal line finishes situations. Fitzpatrick delivered early, connecting on multiple touchdown passes, and building a total that quickly moved beyond typical production. The offense didn't struggle to move the ball. It consistently created points. It becomes difficult to process because the scoring yardage is that clean. 6 touchdown passes indicate repeated success in high-leverage situations. That usually reflects control. Each point drive reinforces that control. Here, that pattern didn't hold because the opposing offense kept matching it. The difference came down to the environment and timing. Pittsburgh continued producing at the same rate, which removed any margin for error. Key moments shifted the game, and despite the overall output, the final moments moved in the opposite direction. Deion Sanders, pick 6 and punt return touchdown in the same game. Deion Sanders produced stats that crosses those boundaries in a way that feels structurally impossible. In a single matchup, he recorded an interception returned for a touchdown and also took a punt back for a score, impacting defense and special teams at the highest level. Playing cornerback demands discipline, positioning, and the ability to read quarterbacks and route concepts. Returning punts requires vision in open space, instant decision-making, and acceleration through traffic. Excelling in one area is already difficult. Producing touchdowns in both roles within the same contest is extremely rare. On the defensive side, the interception required anticipation and timing. Sanders recognized the quarterback's intent, positioned himself correctly, and secured the ball in a way that allowed an immediate transition into open field movement. Once he had possession, his speed created separation quickly, turning what could have been a standard takeaway into a points-on-the-board situation. The punt return adds a completely different layer. Unlike interceptions, the return begins with coverage units already moving at speed. The returner must secure the catch, make an immediate decision, and navigate through multiple angles of pursuit. One mistake usually ends the play early. Sanders didn't just handle the pressure, he turned it into another touchdown, creating a display where 2 separate forms of dominance aligned. Alvin Kamara, 6 rushing touchdowns in one game. Alvin Kamara finished with 22 carries, 155 yards, and 6 rushing touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings back on December 25, 2020. That total ties the NFL record. The New Orleans Saints established a clear pattern. When they reached the red zone, the ball went to Kamara. The defense knew exactly what was coming and still couldn't stop it. Normally, repeated usage in those situations leads to changes, tighter fronts, and forced changes in approach. That shifts never changed the outcome. Kamara's running style played a major role in that consistency. He combined balance, patience, and acceleration in a way that allowed him to navigate tight spaces effectively. Near the goal line, where space is limited, those traits become more important than straight-line speed. He found small openings, maintained control through contact, and finished runs in situations where plays typically stall. Football is built on adaptability. When one approach works repeatedly, the opposing side usually finds a way to limit it. Here, each scoring sequence reinforced the same pattern without interruption. That is what separates this result. It wasn't just high points differential, it was predictable success that still couldn't be stopped. Ben Roethlisberger, back-to-back 6-touchdown games. In late October and early November of 2014, Ben Roethlisberger produced a stretch that challenges how consistency is understood. He threw 6 touchdown passes in one setting, then followed it the next week with another 6-touchdown showing, creating a 2-game span with 12 total throws. The first one came against the Indianapolis Colts, where the Pittsburgh Steelers offense operated with control and pace. Roethlisberger distributed the ball across multiple targets, preventing the defense from focusing on one receiver. The production built steadily, with end zone plays coming through different route concepts and field areas. What stands out in that first outing is how balanced it was. Some high touchdown afternoons rely on a single mismatch or repeated target. Here, the scoring was spread out, which made defensive cooters less effective. There was no single point to contain, and the offense converted opportunities without disruption. The second one was against the Baltimore Ravens, is where the production becomes even more unusual. Defenses typically adapt quickly after a showing like that. Despite preparation and awareness, the same ending appeared again. Replicating that level immediately after reaching it once is extremely difficult, which is why this 2 stretch stands out historically. Matt Ryan, 466 yards in a Super Bowl collapse. Matt Ryan's performance on February 5, 2017, appeared to confirm complete control of the biggest stage. He finished with 466 passing yards as the Atlanta Falcons built a massive lead against the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 51. Atlanta's offense operated with precision. Ryan delivered accurate throws across all areas of the field, converting key situations and maintaining momentum. The yardage accumulated steadily and directly contributed to a lead that appeared secure. At one point, the Falcons held a 28-3 advantage, which under normal conditions would place the contest out of reach. That context is critical. High yardage in a close contest is common. High yardage while building a large lead reinforces the expectation that the outcome is already decided. This impact becomes difficult to process because the structure of the contest changed. The Patriots recalibrated, possession stalled, and key moments shifted control away. Despite the early dominance reflected in the numbers, the outcome moved in the opposite direction, turning a high-level display into part of one of the most dramatic reversals in NFL history. Gale Sayers, 6 touchdowns as a rookie. Gale Sayers' rookie season back in 1965 immediately placed him into a category usually reserved for established stars. He scored 6 touchdowns in a single matchup against the San Francisco 49ers, tying the NFL record. The touchdowns came in multiple forms. Sayers scored as a runner, as a receiver, and on a return. That range matters because it shows the showing wasn't built on one repeated call or a single mismatch. Each role requires a different skill set, and he executed all of them within the same contest. The Chicago Bears found ways to put the ball in his hands, and each opportunity carried the same potential final sequence. The defense couldn't isolate one area to fix because the production came from different phases. When they focused on one, he impacted another. The rookie context amplifies everything. Players entering the league usually require time to familiarize themselves to speed and complexity. Sayers bypassed that entirely. Producing at that level across multiple roles in a single afternoon is rare on its own. Shaun Alexander, 5 touchdowns in a single half. Shaun Alexander produced a scoring stretch that feels compressed beyond what football usually allows in 2002. He ran for 5 touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings, and every one of them came in a single half. 5 rushing scores across an entire matchup already puts a player in rare territory. Packing that many into 2 quarters is what gives this its strange shape. It turns a full game achievement into something that happened inside a much smaller window, which is why it stands out so sharply when you revisit it. In most high-scoring afternoons, touchdowns are spread across 4 quarters, multiple drives, and often several different contributors. Here, the same closing moment kept returning in a concentrated burst. Every time the Seattle Seahawks reached the part of the field where finishing mattered most, Alexander kept ending the possession the same way. That kind of concentrated success is difficult because football usually interrupts those runs. A stalled drive, a penalty, a defensive stop, or one failed short yardage snap is normally enough to break the pattern. None of that happened often enough to slow this down. The offensive structure helped, but it does not fully explain the total. Alexander operated in a system built around coordinated blocking, timing, and a run that could create creases before the defense settled. Even with that kind of support, reaching 5 touchdowns in one half still requires repeated success in the highest leverage situations. Near the goal line, the field tightens. Defenders react faster, and clean space disappears quickly. Alexander still kept finding openings, staying balanced through contact, and finishing plays before the defense could fully close the gap. That is what gives the showing its absurd feel. The Vikings saw the pattern, understood where the damage was coming from, and still could not stop the repetition. 5 touchdowns over 4 quarters would already be memorable. 5 in one half feels like the pacing of the sport temporarily broke. Instead of the usual rise and fall of momentum, the same conversations kept appearing without enough interruption to restore balance. Drew Brees, multiple 5,000-yard seasons. Passing for 5,000 yards in one season is supposed to represent a near-perfect alignment of conditions. A quarterback needs health, volume, efficiency, receiver reliability, and enough week-to-week consistency to keep the total climbing without major drop-off. Not only did Brees reach that mark once, he crossed it multiple times, which is exactly why the production shifts from impressive to absurd. One 5,000-yard season can be explained as a perfect storm. Repeating it suggests something much more durable and much more unusual. Within the New Orleans Saints offense, Brees operated in a system built on timing, spacing, anticipation, and precise ball placement. That setup allowed the passing attack to stay in rhythm, but even a strong system is not enough on its own to create 5,000 yards over and over. A quarterback still has to maintain command across an entire season, deal with changing defensive looks, and keep producing whether the matchup calls for patience, tempo, or aggressive downfield movement. Brees kept doing that across different years, which is a major reason the total matters so much. Durability is another huge part of the story. Seasonal yardage at that level is more than just talent. It depends on availability and sustained sharpness. Even a minor interruption can cut enough attempts and production to keep a player short of the number. Brees remained on the field, kept the offense moving, and continued stacking yardage without the extended slump that usually pulls extreme totals back to earth. That is why the repeatability matters. He was not simply touching a high point once, he kept returning to it. There is also a broader historical layer that gives this production more weight. Plenty of great quarterbacks have had elite passing seasons, but very few have repeatedly crossed the 5,000-yard threshold. Even in an era more open to passing volume, that number still resists repetition. Brees turned what is normally a rare seasonal summit into something he could revisit. Dak Prescott, 450-plus yards and still losing. A quarterback going past 450 passing yards usually signals that he controlled huge portions of the contest. That amount of impact reflects sustained movement downfield, multiple successful drives, and enough offensive traction to shape the ending. Dak Prescott has produced multiple weekends above that range, yet some of those outings still ended in losses. With the Dallas Cowboys, Prescott piled up those yardage numbers through a mix of volume, efficiency, and repeated downfield success. These were not isolated splash plays doing all the work. The ball moved steadily, drives kept building, and the offense generated meaningful chunks across different parts of the field. That matters because it means the yardage was not accidental or empty. It reflected real command over large stretches, which is exactly why the losses attached to those totals feel so counterintuitive. Part of the explanation comes from the environment. In several of those outings, The opposing side either matched or exceeded the pace of touchdown pace, which removed the buffer that high yardage usually creates. Instead of using yardage to sit on control, Prescott had to keep throwing to answer points coming back the other way. In some cases, a portion of the total also came while trying to erase a deficit late. That does not make the yardage less impressive, but it changes how it functioned. Rather than building separation, it became part of a chase. One 450-yard loss can be written off as a shootout or an outlier. When it happens more than once, it starts to look like a pattern where extreme passing production and the final outcome refuse to line up the way they normally should. Football usually rewards that level of quarterback production with control over the result. In these cases, the numbers rose high enough to suggest dominance, yet the wins still did not follow. Brandon Weeden, negative passing yards. Brandon Weeden production on October 5, 2014 directly reverses the basic purpose of passing. Playing for the Dallas Cowboys against the Houston Texans, he finished with negative net passing yards, ending at -7 through the air. That number feels almost impossible in the modern NFL because passing is designed to create positive movement, even on inefficient days. A quarterback can struggle badly and still usually finish above 0. Dropping below it means nearly everything went the wrong way at once. The key detail is the difference between gross passing yards and net passing yards. Net passing includes sacks, which subtract from the total, so a quarterback can complete throws and still finish with very little if the offense keeps losing ground elsewhere. In this case, that exact combination showed up. Weeden did complete passes, but they generated too little yardage to offset what was being lost when the pocket collapsed. Short gains failed to move the offense enough, and each sack dragged the total further backward. Dallas leaned heavily on the run, which meant the passing volume stayed relatively low. When attempts are limited, every negative play carries more weight in the final total. A few sacks and a handful of low-value completions can suddenly distort the entire ending. Against Houston, defensive pressure kept interrupting plays before they could develop, and that constant disruption prevented the passing from doing even the minimum needed to stay above 0. That is why the production feels so strange. It is not merely a low-output passing day. It is a day where the passing functionally moved the offense backward. In an era built around spacing, protection realignments, and quick throws designed to avoid exactly this kind of finish, finishing with negative net yardage feels like an inversion of how modern offense is supposed to work. The number is small, but the weirdness of it is enormous. Lamar Jackson, 5 touchdowns on 15 passes. Passing efficiency is usually built through rhythm, high completion totals, controlled decisions, and a steady climb in returns. Lamar Jackson compressed all of that into remarkably small volume on September 8, 2019, against the Miami Dolphins. He finished with 15 completions, 324 yards, and 5 touchdown passes. 5 scores on that number of completions is what gives the outcome its unusual shape. The Baltimore Ravens established immediate control, and Jackson's successful throws carried huge value almost every time they landed. Rather than building through long, methodical possessions, the offense generated major chunks quickly. Early deep passes stretched the defense, created instant damage, and changed the geometry. That allowed the Ravens to reach maximum output before the passing volume had any need to expand, which is the opposite of how most big touchdown afternoons are built. Another important layer is the range within the production. Jackson did not rely on one repeated concept to pile up those touchdowns. The performance came through different depths and different passing situations, including downfield strikes, intermediate work, and plays that developed after extra time in the pocket. That variety mattered because it prevented Miami from locking on to one answer. The offense was not just efficient, it was diverse enough to keep the defense reacting without finding a stable response. The script makes the final count even stranger. Once Baltimore built a commanding lead, there was no reason to force additional passing attempts just to inflate totals. That kept Jackson's volume low, yet the production was already finished at an extreme level. Most quarterbacks need many more completions and many more throws to reach 5 touchdown passes. Jackson got there before the contest required sustained aerial volume, which is exactly why the outing feels compressed and out of proportion to the workload. Reggie White, 21 sacks in a season. A single sack already requires timing, positioning, and execution against protection schemes designed to prevent it. Reaching double digits across a season places a player in elite territory. Reggie White recorded 21 sacks during the 1987 season with the Philadelphia Eagles, a total that stands among the highest ever and reflects sustained dominance rather than a few isolated spikes. Week after week, opposing quarterbacks faced pressure that translated into outcome, even as offenses modified protection to account for his presence. Most pass rush production relies on variation, disguising pressure, or exploiting specific matchups. White's production came from something more direct. His combination of strength, leverage, and technique allowed him to win individual battles repeatedly, even when the offense knew exactly where the threat was coming from. Another layer comes from how sacks typically accumulate. Unlike yardage totals, they rarely build evenly. A player might dominate one afternoon and then go quiet for stretches. White's total reflects steady output across the schedule. It didn't depend on 1 or 2 extreme outings inflating the number. It developed gradually, which is significantly harder to maintain. The era also matters. Offensive systems at the time leaned more toward the run, which reduced passing volume and limited sack opportunities compared to modern football. Reaching 21 under those conditions highlights how efficient he was at converting chances into impact plays. Chicago Bears, 73 points in a championship game. The Chicago Bears defeated the Washington Redskins by a score of 73-0 in the NFL championship game, perfection that didn't align with how championship matchups are supposed to unfold. The margin alone is extreme. The total itself is what pushes it into territory that still feels difficult to process. Championship settings usually bring balance. Teams reach that stage because they can compete at a high level, which typically results in tighter outcomes. This moved in the opposite direction almost immediately. Chicago established control through execution that the defense could not match. The offensive approach played a major role. Chicago used misdirection and timing to create confusion, and once that confusion took hold, it became difficult for Washington to recover. Each successful play reinforced the same pattern, allowing the end zone finishes to continue without interruption. Instead of building gradually, the total expanded rapidly. Reaching 73 points requires repeated end zone success across multiple possessions without enough resistance to slow the pace. Even in one-sided contests, shifts usually reduce that production. Here, they didn't. That's why this remains the highest goal line finishes total in a championship setting and still feels disconnected from expectation. Mitchell Trubisky, 6 touchdowns before the fourth quarter. Mitchell Trubisky put together an outing back in 2018 that escalated rapidly and left little room for anything else to match it. He finished with 6 touchdown passes against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and all of them came before the fourth quarter. The total itself is rare. The Chicago Bears offense operated with rhythm. Early completions established timing, and once that rhythm took hold, the defense struggled to interrupt it. Each drive followed a similar pattern, with spacing opening across the field and red zone opportunities appearing consistently. What makes this difficult to process is how end zone success usually distributes over time. Even high-output afternoons include stalled drives or adjustments that slow production. Here, that interruption never appeared. The offense kept producing at the same rate, which allowed the total to build quickly within a limited window. The variety of plays also matters. The touchdowns didn't come from one repeated concept. They involved different receivers and different areas of the field, which prevented the defense from locking on to a single adjustment. By the time the contest reached its final phase, the stats had already reached its peak, emphasizing how compressed that afternoon was. J.J. Watt, offensive and defensive touchdowns in the same season. In 2014, J.J. Watt had a performance that challenges how roles are defined. Playing for the Houston Texans, he dominated defensively while also contributing touchdowns on offense. Defensive players rarely take on offensive red zone responsibilities in a consistent way. On defense, Watt generated pressure, recorded sacks, and disrupted offensive structure on a regular basis. That alone places a player among the most impactful in the league. What made this season different is how his role expanded. He was used in specific offensive situations, particularly near the goal line, where his size and positioning created an advantage. When given those opportunities, he converted them into touchdowns. That adds a completely different dimension to the totals. Defensive line play requires constant physical engagement, leverage battles, and positional discipline. Offensive red zone roles demand timing, ball tracking, and execution in space. Watt handled both within the same season. The broader impact shows up in preparation. Opponents had to account for him not only as a defensive presence, but also as a potential offensive target. That dual responsibility is extremely rare and changes how teams approach planning. Combining dominance on one side with scoring contributions on the other creates a profile that doesn't fit typical positional boundaries, which is why the production feels so unusual. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.